Magnus POV. 1 year ago. I was moving silently through the kingdom, unseen by anyone, when I first spotted her. My line of work, if it could even be called that, had taken me around the world more times than I could count. She was my latest target. Concealed in the dense forest underbrush, I blended seamlessly with my surroundings. Her green eyes shone with innocence and joy. I couldn't help but wonder, what kind of monster would order a hit on a child? But I quickly reminded myself that this wasn't just any child. She was the only offspring of Aurelia and Aurelia Carrington. This innocent, green-eyed girl with a hefty bounty on her head was destined to rule the largest lichen kingdom in existence, unless I finished what I was hired to do. A very rich monster, my wolf Fang reminded me. The sunlight danced in her green eyes as she smiled up at a woman who looked almost exactly like her. Her mother, no doubt, shared the same raven hair and emerald eyes. They talked and giggled together, completely unaware of their surroundings. This girl had probably never even considered the possibility of danger. It almost felt wrong to end the life of someone so pure. Innocence doesn't last long in this world, Fang growled. Still, there's something different about this child. I remained perfectly still, my gaze fixed on the little princess I had been paid to kill. Like all royals, she possessed an otherworldly beauty, emerald eyes, raven hair, porcelain skin. In my experience, only those rotten inside were blessed with such outward beauty, a mask to hide the decay within. Was this child rotten, or was I simply struck by her beauty? "You know that's not the case," Fang murmured. "Innocent or not, she must die." I had long since abandoned any remorse for my targets. Humans and lichens were nearly identical in my eyes, both bled the same crimson, and neither wanted to die. My thoughts were interrupted when a pair of emerald eyes looked directly into the forest, right where I was hiding. The girl kept talking to her mother, but her mother's gaze was fixed on me. I knew she couldn't see me, of that I was certain. But something had drawn her attention to the forest, and her curiosity would soon be extinguished, along with her daughter's life. "Go and find your father for me, Aurelia." The woman smiled down at her daughter, nudging her gently. I clenched my teeth in frustration. "I know you're out there," the woman said, turning her full attention to my hidden spot. "I can feel you watching us." I froze. I wanted to move, but her emerald eyes held me captive. They were the exact mirror of her daughter's. "Come out now, and no harm will come to you," she said, her voice strong and fearless. I wondered if her daughter had inherited those qualities. If only she knew why I was here. "How?" Fang murmured. "She can't see us." "Let's humor her," I replied, sensing Fang's caution. I stepped out from the shadows of the forest into the sunlight. The woman with the emerald eyes watched me emerge. She met my gaze with a fierceness that only a mother could muster. I was accustomed to seeing lust, desire, even terror in others' eyes, but this was something different. "What is your reason for being here?" she demanded, her emerald eyes narrowing. And for a moment, I was pulled back into a memory. Flashback. It had been an incredibly long day, one of the longest I'd had in a while. I had just finished dealing with a wealthy politician. The old man's face was a mix of terror and confusion. He seemed to accept his death but refused to die without knowing who had paid for his demise. "Your son sends his regards," I had told him. Realization flashed in his eyes just before I pulled the trigger. Guns might be human weapons, but they had their uses. The son had chosen his own father's death over his own. He had fallen on hard times and owed a large sum of money to one of the biggest gangs. His choice was simple: his life or his father's. Back then, I wasn't as skilled in my profession as I am now. I didn't realize quickly enough that the gang had taken an interest in my services. "I'm not a guard dog," I snarled at the gang leader, a large Italian man. He sat behind a massive desk, his eyes vacant as if he were already dead. I left his office, not considering that I might have been followed. That night, there was an attempt on my life. To say I enjoyed my next move would be an understatement. I slaughtered the 3 gang members who had followed me, then traced my steps back to their leader. Killing his guards was almost too easy. I tore their throats out with my bare hands. The thrill of the fight was intoxicating. I thrived on the hunt. I could hear the leader scrambling in his office, realizing too late that he had picked a fight he couldn't win. Once the leader lay dead at my feet, I went back for the politician's son. I wouldn't get paid for killing him, but I didn't care. It felt like justice. The boy had been born into privilege, with a father who cared for him. He had paid for his own father's death, and now he would pay with his own life. The son died a coward, tears streaming down his face as he begged for mercy. It was almost amusing, watching him plead with a monster, trying to spark some compassion in me. I let him die slowly, painfully. After spending the rest of the day cleaning up the mess and covering my tracks, I needed a strong drink. I jumped into my car and sped out of town, eager to leave this wretched city behind. I didn't stop driving until the sun had disappeared and the moon had risen to take its place. I found myself stepping into a local pub, my mind set on ordering a bottle of my favorite whiskey. As I approached the bar, Fang's discontent rumbled in my mind. "How are you going to pay for that?" he growled, frustration evident. "You killed the person who was supposed to settle our bill." I rolled my eyes, irritation mingling with my own wariness. "I have money. Enough for the bottle and a hotel room for the night. What comes next?" Fang's tone was sharp. "We find a new target," I replied nonchalantly, brushing off his concerns. Fang's dissatisfaction was palpable. He had relished the hunt and kill just as much as I had, and if I was a monster, then he was too. I pulled out a cell phone from my jacket pocket, planning to dispose of it after this call. The phone rang only once before it was answered. "Dante, calling late as usual," came the gruff voice with its heavy accent. Dante was the name my employers had given me, an image they thought suited me. "Forget the image," I thought bitterly. "I need another job." "Did you really expect to be idle?" the voice grunted. I let out a low growl, taking another sip of whiskey. "The target's dead. He double-crossed me." The silence on the other end stretched, and I knew better than to rush him. Patience was crucial in this line of work. It could either be your greatest asset or your downfall. "I have a new job," the voice finally said, tinged with both curiosity and caution. "Can you be in Chthoni by tomorrow night?" "I'll be there," I confirmed, my attention piqued. "Go to Shadow when you arrive. Someone will meet you there at midnight," the voice instructed before the call ended abruptly. Intrigued, I made my way to Chthoni. After a flight and a long car ride, I arrived at Shadow, a dilapidated bar located in the city's grimy underbelly. The streets were deserted, save for a few figures slumped against brick walls. Drugs had taken their toll on the human populace, but lichens were untouched by such afflictions. I pulled the hood of my long coat over my head, concealing my identity. Any influential lichen would recognize the distinctive birthmark on my neck, an unmistakable symbol. Inside the bar, it was eerily empty. No staff, no patrons. A figure cloaked in black occupied the far end of the room. I could sense their gaze on me, though their features remained obscured. "You must be Dante," the hooded figure's voice cut through the silence, laced with an underlying anger. "Yes," I replied curtly. "I hear you have a reputation for efficiency." The figure continued, almost to himself. "I need someone removed from the picture." "How much?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. The man paused before responding. 100 million. The amount grabbed both Fang's and my attention. It wasn't the money that intrigued us, but rather the significance of the target, someone of immense importance. "Who is it?" I asked, my tone demanding. The figure hesitated, as if weighing the gravity of the decision. "Aurelia Carrington," he finally said, the name dripping with a mix of emotions. I was unfamiliar with Aurelia, but the Carrington name was legendary. The royal family had ruled for centuries, commanding the largest and most formidable kingdom known. "With careful planning, this can be done," Fang murmured, his confidence echoing my own. The substantial reward meant we could disappear, vanish without a trace. "Deal," I agreed, turning to leave. "Wait," the figure called out, halting me. "I'll add another 50 million if you retrieve something else for me." I froze, curiosity piqued. "What is it?" "There's a golden necklace designed to resemble branches, with a single emerald in the center." The man's voice grew ragged. "It is crucial, as is the person I've named." "A necklace?" I questioned, surprised by the additional demand. "It is important," he reiterated. "I'll contact you through dispatch when the job is completed," I said, repeating the line I had used countless times, and left the bar. End of flashback. In the present, I found myself facing the raven-haired woman. Her narrowed eyes revealed a depth of understanding I couldn't fully grasp. I couldn't reveal my true purpose, to kill her daughter. Better to be branded a spy than a cold-blooded assassin. "I am watching," I said, carefully masking my accent. Her gaze held a sharp awareness, one that suggested she might uncover my true identity. Her eyes, green like her daughter's, flicked to the golden necklace she wore. It was fashioned to look like delicate branches with a single emerald hanging from the center. Her expression shifted, a silent realization dawning upon her. "Leave now, and I will keep your presence a secret," she commanded, her voice steady with royal authority and a mother's fierce protectiveness. Fang's voice was cautious in my mind. We might not get another chance. Something about this child, this situation, had caused me to hesitate. As I turned to leave, her final words reached me. "Goodbye, Magnus," she said quietly, her gaze lingering on the forest I had retreated into, Aurelia's POV. As I made my way down to the dining room, the eerie silence of the house struck me. The staff were all preoccupied with attending to the guests at my gala. I knew a significant number of people were expected, including both royals and lichens. While the royals were my main concern, they weren't the only ones trying to win me over. Royal families are well known among both lichens and humans worldwide, but there are also other families to consider. Each kingdom has a few wealthy families that usually own parts of the town or major businesses. These families could be human or lichen. Vesper's family is considered one of the more affluent ones. Her mother owns a party planning company and most likely handled the details of my gala. Many wealthy families would be here tonight, all hoping to become my mate. There hasn't been a human on the throne in hundreds of years, but that only seems to encourage them more. I stood alone in the empty dining hall, waiting for my dad to escort me to the ballroom. The golden necklace around my neck felt warm against my skin, buzzing almost cheerfully. I could sense Magnus's commanding presence. Now that we were finally alone, I felt his gaze roam over me freely. The quiet and the heat of his stare became overwhelming. I turned to face him, nearly jumping back at how close he stood. His dark eyes traveled over my face, lingering on my necklace before trailing down the length of my dress. "Beautiful," he said softly, his accent wrapping around the word, making it sound almost exotic. "Thank you," I stammered, breathless as I watched him lift his gloved hand. An intense urge surged through me, sending a shiver down my spine and causing my hands to tremble slightly. I wanted to tear the black mask from Magnus's face and rip the gloves from his hands. Anything that separated him from me had to go. We've been teasing the guy for weeks, and now you're acting all dazed. Kira's voice sounded in my head, shaking me out of my thoughts. I grimaced. "Yeah, and he's ignored us all week because of it." The cold leather of his glove brushed against my heated skin as his finger traced down my cheek. "I don't think he can ignore us much longer," Kira murmured, clearly enjoying the light touch. Confusion and desire twisted within me. I wanted to skip the gala entirely and drag Magnus back to my room. His hand fell to his side as another set of footsteps entered the room. My gaze remained locked on Magnus's dark eyes until my dad cleared his throat. It was hard to pull my eyes away from Magnus's towering figure. Dad frowned at the look on my face, his eyes briefly flicking to Magnus. "You don't think he saw anything, do you?" Kira mumbled. I shook my head. If he had, he'd already be freaking out. "Everything all right, Aura?" Dad asked with concern, stepping closer to me. I sighed, just trying to put on my game face. It wasn't entirely a lie. I dreaded this gala, but also looked forward to gathering some valuable information. The biggest storm inside me had a different cause, one I kept buried deep. "I know these events aren't exactly enjoyable," Dad said, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "Just try to have some fun." He gave me a lopsided smile, the kind that always tugged at the corners of my lips. I glanced at his suit and grinned at the red and gold crown resting on his curly hair. "You look handsome, Dad," I teased, giggling when his cheeks flushed a light pink. I stepped up to him and straightened his red tie, pulling it a bit tighter around his collar. "And you, my daughter, look like a queen," Dad said with a proud smile, the lines around his eyes more pronounced. I smiled back. "And what if I don't feel like a queen?" My stomach twisted in knots, and my thoughts were more tangled than ever. Is this what our kingdom needs in a queen? Dad always seemed to know what to do. He never appeared confused or lost. Dad was silent for a moment, his silver eyes studying my face. Being a good ruler doesn't mean having everything figured out, Aura. It means loving your people and wanting what's best for them. I definitely have that part down, I chuckled softly, a hint of breathlessness in my voice. Dad's smile warmed as he offered his arm to me. You're smart and compassionate, Aura. Being the first female born to an alpha king makes you more special than you realize. You'll be a ruler who makes history. His words both weighed me down with expectations and lifted me with encouragement. Tears stung the back of my eyes, threatening to spill. Don't make me cry now, I giggled, followed by a sniffle. I'll definitely be late if I ruin my makeup. You'll do great, Aura, Dad reassured me as I linked my arm through his. We walked in silence toward the ballroom on the other side of the mansion. A thick red carpet stretched across the floor, and a long red rope separated the two wings of the house. A few guards stood at the entrance, preventing guests from wandering into this part of the mansion. Happy birthday, Princess, Max, one of the guards, greeted me with a smile. Max was a Lycan, but he didn't hold a high rank in the pack. Nevertheless, we treated him with the same respect as anyone else. Thanks, Max, I grinned back. Max extended his bare hand, his smile turning a bit sheepish, a light blush coloring his tan skin. I hope you don't mind, Alpha King, Max said, giving Dad a nervous smile. I stifled a giggle, even though my stomach churned. Tonight, male Lycans and humans would all be trying to touch me, hoping to see if I was their destined mate. It wouldn't be terrible if Max was my mate. He was cute and kind, with a goofy smile and charming dimples. His slight Hispanic accent made him even more endearing, but something about it felt off. Even before placing my hand in Max's, I knew he wasn't my mate. When my skin touched his, nothing happened, just the warmth of his skin against my slightly clammy hand. Max's smile faltered a little, and I gave him a sympathetic grin. I could feel Magnus's intense gaze on me the entire time. I wished I could turn to him and read the emotion flickering in his dark eyes. Don't worry, Max. You'll meet her someday, and she'll be absolutely amazing. I patted his shoulder, relieved when he grinned back. Dad and I continued down the hall, with a silent Magnus following us. I think this is going to be harder on me than it is on you, Dad chuckled, shaking his head. I raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing on my lips. What makes you say that? Well, for one, I'm going to want to kill anyone who touches my daughter, Dad chuckled, leading me to the base of a grand staircase. I laughed at his stern expression. I'm not looking forward to it either. Let me know if anyone gets too friendly, Dad said, raising an eyebrow. If anyone tries anything, have Magnus escort them out. A nervous giggle slipped from my lips at the mention of Magnus. I had a hunch that Magnus might do more than just escort them out, but I kept that thought to myself. Dad led me up the grand staircase to a pair of enormous oak doors adorned with gold and a variety of jewels. Once we passed through these doors, we would descend the staircase in full view of everyone attending the gala. Are you ready, Aura? Dad asked, his smile warm but his eyes heavy with unspoken emotion. I exhaled sharply, trying to steady my nerves. As ready as I'll ever be. I'm sorry your mom couldn't be here for this, Aura. She was always so much better with this kind of thing, Dad murmured, shaking his head. I could see the depth of his love for her in his silver gaze, which only made the thought of finding my own mate all the more daunting. Anyone could see the affection in Dad's eyes when he spoke about Mom. That was the cruel reality of having a mate. If anything happened to them, you'd never truly move on. You'd spend the rest of your life yearning for them, waiting for the moment when you'd finally reunite. I'm glad you're here, Dad, I said, smiling up at him. I couldn't do this without you. With those final words, the guards pushed open the doors, and we stepped into the grand hall to face the crowd. I had been in the ballroom many times before, but its size never failed to amaze me. It was as large as a football field. We moved through the doorway and onto a balcony that overlooked the throng of guests below. I had to stifle a laugh at the thought of how they cleaned a room this massive. The walls soared at least 20 feet high, and the chandeliers hanging above looked as though they could crush anyone unlucky enough to stand beneath them. The classical music ceased, and every gaze in the room turned upward to meet mine. If it weren't for the years of training in etiquette, I might have fainted under the intensity of their stares. A sea of vibrant dresses and dark suits spread out below, hundreds of eyes vying for a chance to connect with mine. I tightened my grip on Dad's arm, feeling a surge of relief when he squeezed back reassuringly. The Alpha King, Aurelia Carrington, and his daughter, Princess Aurelia Carrington, one of Dad's well-dressed attendants, announced to the hushed crowd. We stepped off the balcony and began our descent down the massive staircase, every eye in the room following our every move. It was at this moment that Kira decided to impart her endless wisdom. "Keep your eyes straight ahead," Kira whispered in my mind. I nearly rolled my eyes. "Why are you whispering? No one else can hear you." "Shh, just focus. You don't want to trip," Kira hushed me. I suppressed a groan. I hadn't even been worried about falling until she brought it up. "You're not helping, Kira." A grimace almost crossed my face. "Smile, Aura. You don't want to look constipated. But don't smile too wide, or you'll look unhinged." "Aura," I growled softly, letting a small, composed smile settle on my lips as Dad and I continued our descent. "Geez, there are too many stairs," Kira muttered. "Quiet," I growled, ignoring her further commentary. Somehow, I managed to make it down the stairs without a single misstep, a small victory that gave me a sliver of hope for the evening. We stepped onto a small platform next to the stairs, and I kept my gaze on the crowd while Dad began to speak. Magnus stood just off the platform, only a few feet away from me. For once, I didn't feel his usual intense stare on my back. I knew he'd be hyper-alert with so many people around. I noticed the wary glances some guests cast in his direction. Only a fool would fail to sense the aura of power radiating from him. The black mask and gloves he wore likely only added to their unease. "I would like to personally thank you all for coming," Dad addressed the crowd with a smile. "As you all know, finding your mate is an occasion worthy of celebration. My daughter, Princess Aurelia, is now of age to discover her other half. Once her mate is revealed, there will be a week before her coronation, after which she will take my place." Dad's expression remained stoic despite the murmurs that rippled through the crowd. It was no secret that many Lycans and humans alike were against the idea of an alpha queen. They were stuck in the past, while my dad and I looked toward the future. The old belief that only a man could lead a pack and that women were merely figureheads was something we were determined to challenge. Dad's words were a declaration. He was making it clear where he stood. He wanted everyone to know that his daughter was no mere figurehead. I was to become the Alpha Queen. I was sure that some of the men here assumed they would become Alpha King if they were mated to me, but they were gravely mistaken. I had no intention of stepping aside to let any man rule. While I still had my doubts about myself, there was one thing I knew for sure. This throne belonged to me and my family. Dad turned to me and took a step back, signaling that it was my turn to speak. Public speaking was second nature to me by now. I had been doing it for as long as I could remember. Amara's earlier words echoed in my mind, and I decided to follow her advice. "Welcome, everyone," I said with a dazzling smile that concealed the full extent of my nerves. "It brings me great joy to share this special day with all of you. Finding my other half is something I hold close to my heart. I look forward to meeting each and every one of you." I let my voice flow naturally, high and delicate. I kept the knowledge out of my eyes and projected an image of innocent beauty. I needed them to see me as nothing more than a pretty face in search of her fated mate. Judging by the hungry looks on some of the men's faces, I think I succeeded. The crowd responded with polite applause, and Dad extended his hand for the first dance. I eagerly took it, allowing him to lead me to the center of the ballroom. I offered small smiles to the guests as they parted to make room for us. Dad placed one hand on my waist, and I rested mine on his shoulder. Our other hands joined together as the musicians resumed their playing. I swayed and twirled in time with the music, feeling a rare sense of calm. I had been dancing with my dad for as long as I could remember. He had taught me everything I knew. Some of my fondest childhood memories were of watching him dance with Mom, hearing her breathless giggles as he spun and twirled her around. Magnus stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes scanning the room with a vigilance that made him seem almost inhuman. When his dark eyes finally locked onto mine, it was as if the world around me stopped. My heart fluttered in my chest, and I gave him a small smile before refocusing on my dad. "What are you up to, Aura?" Dad asked, raising an eyebrow as he twirled me with the music. I batted my eyelashes up at him, lowering my voice to a whisper. "They think I'm just a pretty face. I'm letting them believe that." Something flickered in my dad's eyes, and for a moment he almost looked impressed. "You've been talking to Amara, haven't you?" I nodded. "She and Ember are quite insightful," I laughed, knowing full well that Dad could never keep secrets from Ember either. Dad shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Amara and her daughter have a special gift. Unfortunately, that gift can be a huge pain in our asses." I chuckled at his comment. Amara was as close to my dad as Ember was to me. "They can be very helpful sometimes." "They can," Dad agreed, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "I keep treating you like a child, Aura. For that, I apologize." "I'm your daughter, Dad. You'll always try to protect me," I said, offering him an understanding smile. "I'm not going to dissuade you from your decision, but I will give you a warning." Dad gave me a serious look as we continued to dance. "Be careful with these men. They've been playing these games for far longer than you have, so stay on your toes, and don't trust any of them." "It's about time someone beat them at their own game." Kira's voice was confident in my head, but Dad's words left me uneasy. I frowned. "How do we stand a chance against some of these men?" "We stay on our toes, just like Dad said. They'll never expect us, Kira. They're cocky and think they're already winning," Kira replied. "I'll be careful," I promised Dad. "But it's about time someone beat them at their own game." A proud smile spread across Dad's face as he looked at me with newfound respect. "I was never one for games, but you know that already, Aura. If anyone could beat them, it would surely be my daughter." "They won't see it coming," I said with a confident nod, keeping a carefree smile on my face. "Let me know if you find anything out, will you?" Dad murmured, his smile returning. "Of course, Dad." I patted his shoulder just as the song ended. Uncle Orion approached us, drawing some irritated looks from the men in the crowd. "May I have a dance with my niece?" Orion grinned at Dad and me. "Of course, Ori," Dad chuckled, giving me a wink before walking off. Others moved onto the dance floor, and my eyes widened when I saw Vesper dancing with an attractive blonde guy. She caught my eye and waggled her eyebrows at me. I grinned back before turning my attention to my uncle. We danced in the same way Dad and I had, my hand on his shoulder while his rested on my hip. "Are you ready for the rest of the night?" Uncle Orion chuckled, reminding me of the nervousness I had felt earlier. I sighed softly, still smiling. "As ready as I'll ever be, I suppose." "Everything changes once you find your mate," Orion said, seemingly forgetting what he told me last week. I kept my gaze light, a small smile on my lips. "And what if I choose someone who isn't my mate?" "Your father might not understand, but I would," Orion nodded. "In my experience, sometimes you have to choose your own mate." "I'll think about that, Uncle," I smiled, ignoring the twisting feeling in my gut. "That's a beautiful necklace, Aura." Orion's eyes flickered down to the emerald resting against my throat. "I remember your mother wearing it for quite some time." "Dad gave it to me for my birthday," I said, grinning up at him. I was about to ask more about its potential powers when something stopped me. The necklace grew warm against my skin, almost uncomfortably so. As soon as I decided to stay quiet, it cooled down again. It was as if the necklace was warning me, not specifically about Uncle Orion, but about revealing its secrets. There was no telling who might be listening to our conversation, and it was in my best interest to play ignorant. "Maybe our special ability is knowing when to keep quiet," Kira snickered. "I was hoping for something cooler." "Me too," I frowned. Like being able to fly or something." Kira grimaced. "I'm a wolf. I don't do flying. I was thinking more along the lines of firepower." I scoffed. "The last thing you need is firepower. I'd never hear the end of it." "Did your father mention anything else about the necklace?" Orion asked, his smile gentle. The necklace warmed again, and I looked up at him in confusion. "Was there something he should have told me? I know it belonged to Mom. Is it special or something?" Something flashed in Orion's eyes, and he chuckled. "Nothing you need to worry about right now." That necklace was given to your mother by her mother. As the music began to end, Uncle Orion pulled me closer for a moment. I might have gotten carried away, but there's a reason I asked for a dance. Uncle Orion's expression turned serious. I've found some interesting information about your bodyguard that you might want to hear. Kira's ears perked up, and my curiosity was piqued as well. What is it? I asked, but Uncle Orion glanced at the crowd. I'll catch up with you later. Too many people are waiting to speak with you. Uncle Orion gave me a sympathetic grin and a quick peck on the forehead. Happy birthday, Aura, and best of luck. I nearly laughed as Uncle Orion retreated, striking up a conversation with Dad across the room. With a playful glare at my uncle, I made my way to the large table where several servers stood. I nearly jumped when I sensed Magnus behind me. Goodness, you scared me, I sighed, placing a hand over my chest. Magnus stared at me with his dark eyes, one eyebrow raised at my startled reaction. My heart fluttered at the sight of him, and I pouted slightly. Next time, make some noise or something. You're like a ninja. I heard a soft huff from behind his mask and almost giggled. I wouldn't mind ditching this whole thing and spending the rest of the night with Magnus, Kira muttered. I sighed. You and me both, but we have to be here. Hello, Princess. Several male voices chimed in unison. I giggled as 4 men approached me. It was clear 3 were Lycans, likely from wealthy families. Let the games begin. Kira rolled her eyes. The 4 men wasted no time introducing themselves. They each stated their name and family, clearly here to seek my hand. They were all attractive in their own way, but none truly caught my attention. One of them seemed to be well into his 30s, while the other 3 were around my age. I had no specific preference for my mate's age, but I hoped he was closer to mine. Each time, I pretended to be interested, looking into their eyes with a hopeful expression, anticipating that telltale connection. As expected, nothing happened when my hand met theirs. Each time, I feigned disappointment, letting out a small sigh. Magnus watched the entire interaction in silence. I caught his eye as the 4 men walked away. He raised an eyebrow at them, tilting his head slightly. You could become an actress, Kira noted approvingly. Do you really think so? I chuckled, pleased that Kira approved of my performance. It meant I was doing something right. A young server approached me with a warm smile. He looked to be around my age, with a slim, chiseled face and a dark stubble tracing his chin. Would you like something to drink, Princess? He asked politely. I returned his smile. Water, please. Or are you going to ask for my hand in marriage, too? I teased, watching the faint blush rise on his cheeks. I wanted wine to steady my nerves, but I didn't want to be labeled as the boozy princess. No worries, Princess. I won't be proposing, he chuckled. My boyfriend is actually one of your stylists. His eyes brightened with affection at the mention of his boyfriend, and I couldn't help but smile. Ken, right? I grinned. He should be around here somewhere. The server's eyes widened in surprise. He's here? Absolutely, I replied. Before he could say more, Vesper's voice piped up from behind me. Aurelia, she squealed. If I spot Ken, I'll send him your way. I called over my shoulder as I turned to face Vesper. I've been searching for you everywhere, Vesper huffed, her face slightly flushed. I wondered if her color was due to the handsome blonde she'd been dancing with. Have you seen Ember? I asked, scanning the crowd for the golden dress. Vesper nodded. I saw her not too long ago. I'm sure she's around, but there's someone who wants to meet you. Suppressing a groan, I forced a polite smile and followed her. I could already tell I wouldn't like this man. It was the same blonde guy from earlier, who looked like he had just stepped off a runway. Sandy blonde hair, tanned skin, and a smile that could melt hearts. He had Royal Lycan written all over him. As we approached, he flashed a dazzling smile that made many of the women around us swoon. You should be one of those women, Kira muttered in my mind. I stifled a sigh and plastered my own charming smile. I let my gaze wander over his physique, pretending to be impressed. His smirk widened, and I hoped he was too self-absorbed to notice my insincerity. He was standing too close to the other women, who looked as infatuated as Vesper had. Quite the player, isn't he? Kira commented with a hint of disdain. And your name? I inquired, trying to sound intrigued. I regretted asking the moment irritation flickered in his eyes. You don't know who I am? He huffed, his blue gaze clouded with annoyance. "My father never made it a priority to teach me," I replied, forcing a ditzy smile. "My mate will fill in those gaps for me." His demeanor softened and his charming smile reappeared. "I'm Evander Winslow." The name clicked immediately. I knew the royal families by name, though their faces were less familiar. "Winslow," I repeated, savoring the name. "Your kingdom is quite vast, isn't it?" "Fourth largest in the world," he said, his tone dripping with pride as he extended his hand. I stepped forward and placed my hand in his, feigning interest. His impatience grew as we lingered. "Leave us," Evander commanded the surrounding women, who quickly dispersed. Vesper looked relieved and skipped away happily. "I was hoping you'd be my mate," I said, letting my gaze drop to his lips and then his chest. Evander's smile faltered slightly as he glanced at the other men. "In my family, mates are more of an option. We could still work something out." "An option?" I asked, feigning ignorance. He lifted my chin with his hand and examined me like a prized possession. "Beautiful," he murmured. "My parents aren't mates. My father's true mate was deemed too weak to rule. Power is crucial in our line of work. Consider how advantageous our union could be." He released my chin with a final, dazzling smile. I was itching to escape and find Ember. Evander felt sleazy, and my intuition, though not as sharp as Ember's, told me to steer clear. "You'd be his trophy queen while he indulges in other women," Kira said quietly. "Lucky me," I said, pretending to swoon and rolling my eyes at the thought of Evander. "It's likely he doesn't fit in as well with the others because he's a man," Kira mused. "I'm sure that's part of it," I sighed. "It's something we'll have to navigate." "Everyone will make things harder for us because you're a woman," Kira growled. "Someday they'll see," I assured her. "If I have a daughter, things will be different when she takes the throne." I wove through the crowd, stopping to greet various men, each time feigning disappointment when they weren't my mate. Some men had the audacity to boast about what they could offer: money, strong children, endless social status. None of these appeals interested me, and none of the men did either. Finally, I had a little time to myself. I moved closer to one of the tall, arched windows in the ballroom while I lingered there. The thick red velvet drapes served as a much-needed barrier, keeping some of the other guests away from me. All I needed was a moment to collect my thoughts and breathe. It wasn't precisely the character I wanted to play, pretending to be a carefree, innocent princess. A deep voice that was definitely Magnus whispered, "You're playing a dangerous game." I spun around to look him in the eye. His eyes held a depth of understanding that made me realize how little I actually understood about him. I scowled and said, "The game started long before I was born. It's high time I signed up." It was common knowledge that most royals did whatever was necessary to gain and keep power. Scandals were rife throughout my life: children born of affairs, political plots, even mysterious deaths. Being royal meant being cunning, always knowing whom to trust and when to play your cards, never letting anyone have the upper hand. My mother had been very clear about the dangerous games royals played, always warning me about their true nature. She had explained how they dug up dirt on everyone and how their words always carried hidden meanings. "Be careful," Magnus said, his dark eyes locked on mine. I sighed, feeling a swirl of butterflies in my stomach at his words. "Aurelia, there you are!" Ember's voice called out, and I quickly turned to see her approaching through the crowd. She stopped just a few feet away from where I stood near the window. "I've been looking everywhere for you," she sighed, shaking her head. "I tried to find you too, but I couldn't get a moment to myself," I replied, frowning. Ember grimaced, shaking her head. "I don't know how you're putting up with this, being paraded around like a piece of meat." "Trust me, I hate it," I murmured in a low voice. "Aurelia!" called a voice from the past. I turned and my jaw nearly dropped when I saw Zane and his younger brother approaching. Zane had always been stunning, with his dark hair swept to the side in that classic Superman style, icy blue eyes and a smile that showed off perfect teeth. His brother Lucas was like a smaller version of him, but with a rounder face and a pair of adorable dimples. "Zane!" I exclaimed, quickly recovering from my surprise. Zane had just turned 19 and taken over his parents' small kingdom. The last time I'd seen him was a year ago, before my mother had passed away. Back then, he'd been shorter and lankier, but now he'd filled out with muscle, grown a few inches taller, and his face had become more chiseled. "I couldn't find you anywhere," Zane laughed, his grin as playful as ever. "Are they giving you a hard time?" He looked incredibly handsome in his dark suit, the fabric flecked with a shade of blue that matched his striking eyes. "You don't know the half of it," I chuckled, shaking my head. Zane was just about to take my hand when he noticed Magnus standing beside me, his presence imposing. "Who's this, Aura?" Zane asked, his eyes narrowing slightly as he glanced between Magnus and me, noting the close distance between us. "He's my bodyguard," I explained, glancing once more at Magnus's dark eyes. Magnus stared back at Zane with an unreadable expression, almost as if he was glaring. Ember cleared her throat. Could I speak with Aura in private for a moment?" Zane pulled his gaze away from Magnus and gave Ember and me a smile. "As long as I get a turn when you're done. I've got a whole year's worth of catching up to do." Ember glanced at me, a strange urgency lighting up her honey-colored eyes. "Deal," I agreed with a grin. Zane smiled back softly before giving a small wave and stepping away. "I think Lucas might have a crush on you," I teased Ember with a smirk. Lucas had filled out nicely too, and if I wasn't mistaken, he'd be turning 18 in just a few months. Ember rolled her eyes. "I'm not here to meet guys. They're all here for you anyway." I frowned. "Lucas barely looked at me, but he was definitely eyeing you." She rolled her eyes again, but I noticed a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. "Whatever," she said. "That's not what I need to talk to you about. Go ahead. This night's already been interesting enough," I replied, sitting down on the thick windowsill. Ember took a seat beside me and gave Magnus a wary glance. "You can trust him," I assured her, finding it almost funny how quickly I'd come to defend Magnus, considering how little I actually knew about him. "I know," she muttered. I wanted to ask her more, but something about Magnus's dark gaze kept my questions unspoken. "We shouldn't even be discussing this here, but I have to tell you something," Ember said, her voice low and tense, her chocolate curls bouncing as she shook her head. Ember always had a knack for making me worry, a talent she was fully displaying at this very moment. "What do you mean?" I demanded, exasperation creeping into my voice. I was tired of the cryptic answers. Ember's golden eyes darted around, scanning the other guests. Most were dancing, chatting, or indulging in the food and wine. Some clustered in small groups, occasionally casting glances our way. "We're definitely being watched," Ember muttered, shaking her head. I frowned, considering her words. It made sense. This place was filled with royals, strangers, and wealthy families. "Just tell me what you can," I sighed, trying to keep my frustration in check. "We can talk more later." Ember nodded. "A royal family arrived about 5 minutes ago. I don't know who they are, but they seem important." "I wonder who it could be," I mused, recalling the 2 royal families I had already met tonight, Evander Winslow and Zane's family. Ember shrugged. "I didn't catch any names, but I do know your dad was furious when they showed up." "Wait, what?" My voice rose, tinged with worry. "Why would he be mad?" "I'm not sure," Ember said, shaking her head. "I just heard him saying they had no right to be here. One of the men in the family told your dad you deserved to know if one of them was your mate." I felt a strange unease settle over me. "Stay with me for the rest of the night?" I asked, feeling more uncertain than ever. After all, I knew my father didn't always get along with other royals, but outright disrespect was unusual for him. He must have had a good reason for not liking this family. Yet again, it was another thing I was kept in the dark about. "I'm not leaving your side after that mess," Ember assured me, shaking her head. I sighed and glanced over at Magnus. His dark obsidian eyes seemed distant, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. "I appreciate it," I said softly. "Zane, you can come out now," Ember called with a slight grumble, and a sheepish Zane poked his head from behind the curtains. "Did he hear any of that?" I whispered to Ember. "No lover boy has more sense than that," she whispered back, a teasing smile on her lips. I rolled my eyes at her comment and turned to grin at Zane as he stepped into view. "Where did Lucas go?" I asked, glancing over at Ember. Zane shrugged. "Mom needed him for something. They're really excited to see you again, you know." "I missed them a lot," I said, a soft smile spreading across my face. Ember and I stood up from the windowsill, joining Zane in conversation. All the while I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation, knowing that at some point, Zane and I would touch, and I would finally know if my childhood crush was my soulmate. "I never got the chance to say it, but I'm sorry about your mom," Zane said, his voice soft and sincere. His hand rubbed the back of his head in that endearing way that used to send butterflies fluttering in my stomach. I sighed, offering him a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you. It's been hard, but we're managing." Zane nodded. "I understand. We would have visited, but your dad kind of shut everything down after it happened." "Yeah, he didn't have much of a choice," I replied, my voice tinged with a sadness I couldn't quite shake. "He couldn't risk losing me, too." Zane nodded again. "I get it, but I still wish I could have been there for you." A familiar flutter of affection stirred in my stomach. Zane had always been special to me. Our mothers were best friends, and his visits with a little Zane in tow were some of my fondest memories. He was always so polite, never pressuring me for more than sweet words and hand-holding. "So, you've got a bodyguard now?" Zane chuckled, though his eyes flicked uneasily to Magnus. There was something about Magnus's presence that seemed to put everyone on edge, even if it didn't affect me in the same way. I nodded, glancing over at Magnus, whose gaze was fixed intently on Zane. "Yes, Dad hired him after the attack started." "I heard about those," Zane said with a grimace. "Did they ever find out who was behind them?" I shook my head. "Not yet, but my dad won't give up. He's too stubborn for that." Zane chuckled softly. "That sounds like him. I'm sure he's already discussed it with my dad. Just be careful tonight, Aura. Not everyone here is a friend." I nodded, the weight of his words settling in my chest. "I'll keep that in mind." Ember's golden eyes flicked between Zane and me. "I'll give you two a minute. I'll be nearby." She shot me a knowing look before walking over to the service table. Zane shuffled his feet nervously, casting another wary glance at Magnus. "Mind if I have a moment alone with her?" Zane asked Magnus. Curiosity piqued. I already knew what Magnus's response would be. "No," Magnus replied, his deep voice carrying a note of finality. "King's orders." While I was grateful Magnus wasn't outright hostile toward Zane, his voice seemed to have an inexplicable effect on me. The more I heard it, the harder it became to distance myself from him. Zane sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I'm sure you've been asked this all night," he chuckled, looking a little flustered. "This isn't how I pictured this moment," I admitted, giving him a small smile. "But after everything our families have said, I think we owe it to ourselves to find out." I stepped closer to Zane, allowing his hand to gently cup my face. His touch was familiar and comforting, different from Evander's but lacking the intense, passionate charge I had felt with Magnus. Looking into Zane's blue eyes, I couldn't help but imagine what a life with him would be like. It would be simple, easy. There would be no struggles, no boundaries to overcome. It would be a life without conflict, but also without mystery, without passion. No fiery desire, no touches that left your skin burning and your mind reeling. And in that moment, I knew Zane Hawthorne was not my mate. Zane's expression fell as our touch faded without leaving the mark we'd both hoped for. I wasn't entirely sure how to recognize a mate. My mother always spoke of it as a surge of emotions, an undeniable connection that sparked the bond to life with a single touch. But with Zane, all I felt was the comfort of familiarity, a gentle reminder of what could have been. I always thought. Zane's voice trailed off, leaving unspoken words between us. This time, I didn't have to pretend. I offered him a sad smile, knowing this moment had been inevitable. So did everyone else. For a while, I did too. I squeezed his hand gently, a final bittersweet gesture. His crystal-clear eyes searched mine, emotions swirling within them. "If you're not my mate, then who is?" He sounded lost, vulnerable. "I'm already 19. I should have found her by now." "There's still plenty of time, Zane," I reassured him with a smile. "Sometimes you don't need to search so hard." Zane sighed but didn't let go of my hand. "We could still be together, you know," he said, his usual charming grin on display, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "We've always been good for each other." I had received similar offers throughout the night, but Zane's was different. This wasn't about power or status. It felt like Zane was simply seeking comfort in what was familiar, in what he knew. You know we can't do that. I let another sad smile touch my lips. Zane and I were raised with the same values. Our families revered the sacredness of a mate bond. No one else could ever take the place of a true mate. He sighed again, but this time his smile was more genuine. Our moms would never forgive us if we gave up on our mates, he chuckled. I giggled and nodded. We'd never hear the end of it. We'll always be close, though, right? His smile wavered as he looked at me, seeking reassurance. Always, I grinned. You'll always have me and my kingdom by your side. It was a bold promise, but Zane was a good person with a kind heart. And you'll always have me and my kingdom, even if it isn't much, Zane chuckled. I shook my head. Quality over quantity, Zane. I met one of these royals today, and I'm not impressed. Which family did you meet? Zane snickered. In the wake of my mother's passing, I had missed Zane's coronation. It was customary for royals to attend each other's coronations as a sign of respect. I had no doubt that Zane had become well acquainted with some of the other royals. Evander Winslow, I replied with exaggerated drama. Zane's carefree smile vanished, replaced by a weary laugh. In that moment, he didn't look like the boy I once held hands with. He looked like a ruler, authority radiating from him even as caution clouded his features. Evander Winslow, Zane repeated with a grimace. Stay on your guard around him. Zane's warning was cut off by Ember, who hurried to my side. There are some very impatient royals eager to meet you, Ember grumbled. I gave Zane an apologetic smile. Don't worry about it. I feel bad for you, he chuckled. I'll catch up with you later, and we can continue our conversation. Zane gave me a look, one that hinted at things left unsaid. Getting any strange vibes from these royals? I asked, frowning as I scanned the crowded room. Ember grimaced. Watch out for the sister. Before I could press her for more, Ember grabbed my elbow and pulled me into the throng of people. She released her grip only when we reached a pair of strikingly identical figures. At first glance, it was clear the boy and girl were twins. Both were tall and lean, their hair a fiery red that seemed to blaze under the lights. Their pale skin appeared almost translucent. As I approached, the girl's face twisted into a sour grimace. I felt Ember's elbow brush my side, but I kept my focus on the twins. Princess Aurelia, a pleasure, the red-haired girl said in a wispy voice. The freckles on her nose shifted as she wrinkled it in distaste. I plastered on a fake smile and greeted the beautiful twins. Pleasure. She doesn't even know who we are, the girl scoffed, silenced only when her brother placed a hand on her arm. The boy stepped forward with a smooth, lithe movement. Despite his lanky frame, there was something unsettling about him, a warning from my gut that this wasn't someone to be trifled with. Dylan Lancaster, Princess. And this is my charming sister, Daisy. Dylan introduced them with a gesture toward his twin. They wore matching colors, but their appearance was so eerily similar that one might mistake them for a couple. Daisy's ball gown was a deep shade of purple, accentuating her slim waist, while Dylan's black suit was adorned with touches of the same purple. If not for their unsettling similarity, they might have seemed like each other's dates. Dylan Lancaster, I repeated, committing his name and family to memory. Remember that name, I told Kira. Kira nodded. Don't worry, I've got this. I intended to remember every royal I met tonight, along with the impression they left on me. And you, Princess Aurelia, look stunning, Dylan complimented, his thin lips curling into a smile. Another set of flawless teeth. Dylan extended his hand, shooting his sister an annoyed glance as she scoffed. Why did we come here, dear sister, if not to help the princess find her mate? Dylan's voice held a note of wariness, his flame-colored eyebrow arching at his sister. Daisy rolled her eyes, an act that was as beautiful as it was irritating. I'm here for the wine. Suit yourself. She glided away, but not before casting one last nasty look in my direction. My eyes flickered down to Dylan's outstretched hand for just a moment before I placed my own in his, hoping with all my might that he wasn't my mate. Relief washed over me when nothing happened at his touch. Dylan remained completely unfazed, as if our hands had never met. She's going to be one to watch out for, Kira sighed. I apologize for my sister's lack of manners, Dylan said, frowning with genuine regret. I'm afraid she's quite jealous. Surprise flickered across my face, breaking my carefully maintained facade for just a second before I quickly restored it. Dylan noticed my slip and gave me a grim smile. We're the firstborn twins in over 100 years. Daisy is just a few minutes older than I am, and yet I'm the one who takes the throne, Dylan explained with an indifferent tone, his hazel eyes void of emotion. It was hard to imagine that some of these royals had been trained from childhood to conceal their emotions. It made me feel sheltered, inexperienced. She wants to rule? I asked, my curiosity piqued. I wanted to know more, though I wasn't sure how much Dylan would be willing to share. Dylan's grim smile returned, shadowing his face. Understandably so, but my sister and I see the world through different lenses. It would be advantageous for you to align with me, and I would reciprocate in kind. His words left me both puzzled and uneasy. There was an undercurrent of something more in his statement, but its meaning was elusive. Before I could dwell on it, Dylan's attention shifted as another red-haired man approached us. A fleeting, unreadable emotion flickered in Dylan's eyes before he turned to me, suddenly alert. His gaze flicked to Magnus, as if noticing him for the first time. Then, in a move that caught me off guard, Dylan leaned in close. His breath, tinged with the scent of liquor, brushed my cheek as he whispered urgently in my ear. "There are no lengths she wouldn't go to for what she desires," he murmured, just as the red-haired man reached us. Dylan pulled back abruptly, his expression now one of indifference, as if our exchange had never occurred. "Princess Aurelia, I see you've met my son," the red-haired man greeted me with a warm smile. Dylan's warning rang in my ears, making me more guarded than ever. I refused to let a friendly smile weaken the mask I had firmly placed. "I have," I replied with a bright, practiced smile. The only trait Dylan and his father seemed to share was their vibrant red hair. His father was a large man, his muscular frame softened by age, giving him the appearance of a half-giant. A woman with hair so pale it resembled snow soon joined them. "Aiden and Lily Lancaster, a pleasure to meet you, Princess." Dylan's father introduced himself with a genial smile. Lily, Dylan's mother, studied me with a look that echoed her daughter's, one of thinly veiled disdain. "Why don't you two go find Daisy?" "I'd like a word with the princess," Lily suggested with a sharp smile aimed at her husband and son. Dylan shot me a cautious glance before walking away with his father. The twins had inherited their father's hair color, but every other feature clearly came from Lily. She was stunning, with snow-white hair that contrasted sharply against her pale skin and hazel eyes. Tall and slim, she had the grace of a supermodel and an air of cold expertise. "Would you mind giving us some space?" Lily looked down at Ember with contempt, her tone dismissive. I bit back the retort that threatened to escape and instead gave Lily a sickly sweet smile. "She's my assistant, and she'll stay by my side," I declared, my voice firm. I sensed Ember straighten beside me, her confidence bolstered by my words. She had always been there for me, supporting me without hesitation. The title of assistant seemed far too small for someone like her. She deserved much more. I could feel the power within me rising, and I knew Lily could sense it too. But rather than fear, I saw disappointment flash across her features. After meeting Daisy and now Lily, I quickly realized that the female royals were not to be underestimated. I wondered how my mother had managed to navigate this world so effectively. The thought of her not being here to guide me filled me with a deep, aching sadness. "My son is not your mate," Lily sighed, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized me. I tilted my head, feigning ignorance. "That's a bold assumption." Lily let out a sound that was half chuckle, half sneer. "You're far too powerful to be paired with someone like my son. He may resemble me, but his mind is all his father's." "I don't like her," Kira growled in my mind. "I'd like to hear what Ember thinks of her." "You and me both," I agreed silently. "He could make a fine ruler one day," I remarked, unsettled by the way Lily spoke about her own son. Lily scoffed, rolling her hazel eyes. "You truly believe that, don't you? Imagine how different the world would be if women were in charge." I considered her words. Yes, things would be different, but that didn't mean men were incapable of ruling. A healthy balance was necessary, a mutual respect and understanding that women were just as capable as men. The world needed rulers who were good and compassionate, not selfish and demeaning. "As a fellow she-wolf, I thought you might understand our plight," Lily sighed, her expression turning sorrowful, but her eyes told a different story. cold and calculating. I agree, though perhaps with a few adjustments, I replied neutrally, even though both Kira and I bristled with anger. Lily dropped the pretense of sadness and regarded me with a calculating gaze. You're a bright girl, just like your mother. You must see that we belong on the same side. After all, we're facing the same challenges. I could taste the underlying meaning of her words, and Ember's elbow nudging my side felt like a warning. I wasn't sure what she was trying to convey, but it heightened my sense of caution. I wasn't aware there were sides to choose, I responded, keeping my expression blank. Lily's smile turned cruel. There have always been sides, and there always will be. It's how you get things done. And what would joining your side entail? I asked, the jewelry around my neck warming as a strange sensation twisted in my gut. My instincts were screaming a clear warning. I was treading on dangerous ground. Lily's smile remained fixed, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Oh, nothing extreme. You do me a favor, I do you one. We look out for each other. The word favor struck a nerve, sending my anxiety spiraling. The jewelry around my neck buzzed with energy. I knew that my next words could very well make me my first real enemy. I'm afraid we're not on the same side, Lily. I kept my voice steady, my expression emotionless, though it took all my effort. Lily sighed in disappointment, but I could see the anger simmering behind her hazel eyes. Oh dear, so young, so naive. You'll see in time how right I am. After all, we she-wolves need to stick together, she cooed, her tone condescending, as if I were a child who had just made a grave mistake. Lily departed, but not before giving Ember a hard, lingering look. The breath I'd been holding escaped in a sharp exhale. Inside, I was a mess of conflicting emotions: anxiety, pride, exhaustion, and frustration. This evening had tested my strength, but it also proved I had the nerve and will to play their game. I might lack experience, but I was determined to learn. In the midst of all the secrets and deceit, one thing was certain: there was no way I would ever be on Lily's team. After Lily finally walked away, Ember exhaled sharply, her relief palpable. Definitely worse than her daughter, she muttered, shaking her head. And they're from the third largest kingdom, just so you know. Great, I sighed, feeling the weight of all this new information pressing down on me. I wondered how I'd manage to sleep tonight with everything swirling around in my mind. There's something off about that Dylan guy, Kira remarked, her voice tinged with the same confusion I felt. Curious, I turned to Ember as we approached one of the service tables. What did you think about Dylan? I asked quietly, taking a gulp of cool water and wishing it was something stronger. Ember hesitated, her honey-colored eyes clouding over in thought. I once saw a cat living out in the woods, she began, her voice contemplative. It hated anyone who came near it. Wasn't mean, just scared and always on edge. But when I brought it some food, it warmed up to me. It just needed a bit of help. She shrugged, seemingly satisfied with her analogy. I definitely needed some wine now. Ember, that makes no sense, I sighed, gritting my teeth in frustration. If this kept up, I might end up needing a drink just to get through the day once I became queen. Ember rolled her eyes at my reaction. Dylan has the same look in his eyes as that cat did. I think he's scared and always on guard. Maybe he just needs someone he can trust. Her words, while odd, held a strange logic, but they also sounded borderline insane. How reliable was this unusual insight of hers? Don't look at me like I'm crazy, Aurelia, Ember warned, raising a sharp eyebrow in my direction. Despite the tension of the evening, I couldn't help the grin that spread across my face. You might be a little crazy, but you're my assistant, so it doesn't matter, I replied, flashing her a smile. Her stern expression softened, and I knew I'd won her over. And don't you forget it, she said, her tone lightening. You hired me, and don't you dare try to get rid of me. Princess or not, I'll sick my mama on you. Her raised eyebrow made me chuckle, but the mention of her mother made me pale slightly. I would never risk the wrath of Amara, I assured her quickly. Ember's mother was a force of nature, someone who could likely overthrow a kingdom on her own. Satisfied, Ember grabbed herself some wine, noticing the envious look on my face as she took a sip. These royals won't let you drink, huh? Can't have a drunken, ditzy princess? I replied with a roll of my eyes. The royal families were all lichens, well aware that it would take nearly a dozen bottles for us to get drunk. But it still looked bad, especially for the females. I found out earlier who your dad was talking about, Ember said, her tone more serious now. Confusion crossed my face. What? When he was mad as all hell earlier because that family showed up unannounced, she clarified, giving me an impatient look. My mouth fell open as realization dawned. Who were they? You've already met the 3 biggest royals in the world, Ember explained, pausing to take another sip of wine. Zane's kingdom is in last place. That Winslow boy is from the 4th largest, those weird twins are from the 3rd, and the family that came unannounced is from the 2nd. I've never heard about the 2nd largest kingdom, I frowned. Maybe I'd been taught about it as a child, but the only royal I'd met until now was Zane. Ember shook her head. It seems like your family and theirs don't get along. She leaned in closer, speaking loud enough for only Magnus and me to hear. If there's a war brewing with your family, my best guess is that other family has something to do with it. I wanted to laugh at her paranoid behavior, but I couldn't blame her given the royals we'd encountered. Aurelia, my dad's voice called out from behind me. Without turning, I could tell he was either stressed or furious. Ember and I turned around, my confusion deepening at the sight of his scowl and the way his fingers tapped impatiently at his side. What's wrong, Dad? I asked, stepping closer to him. He sighed, attempting to run a hand through his salt and pepper hair, but the large crown on his head stopped him. He touched it gingerly, frustration evident on his face. There's another family here for you to meet, he said through clenched teeth. We're not on good terms, but you deserve every chance at finding your mate. Why haven't you told me about them before? I frowned, a mixture of frustration and curiosity bubbling up. Dad sighed again, looking more tired than ever. I tried to keep all of this from you. Everything I did to protect you has just left you unprepared. The regret in his voice twisted my stomach into knots. No matter how much I wanted to be angry with him, I couldn't. It was a miracle he hadn't lost himself when Mom died. He did what he thought was right at the time. Taking a deep breath, I pushed my emotions aside and put on a determined face. Let's meet them, but I expect an explanation later. I gave him a stern look, my lips twitching when a relieved yet exasperated expression crossed his face. Of course, Alpha Queen, Dad replied, his lips curving into a faint smile, though the stress lingered in his eyes. Something stirred within me when he called me by my future title. It felt like a shift, a melding of uncertainty with something stronger, something that felt like confidence. This was the beginning of something new, something that would hopefully shape me into the ruler I was destined to become, someone my dad and Mom could be proud of. Dad extended his arm, and I looped mine through it, following him through the crowd with Ember and Magnus close behind. Stay very close to her, I heard Dad mutter to Magnus as we navigated through the sea of guests. We ended up on the outskirts of the crowd, standing by a towering window that offered a stunning view of the ballroom gardens. The entire garden was draped in twinkling lights, marble fountains, and rose-covered benches. It looked like something out of a dream. Through the window I could see Uncle Orion weaving through the crowd, a few unfamiliar faces following closely behind. One of those unfamiliar faces made me pause, my breath catching in my throat. The man looked like an angel. His skin was a flawless ivory that accentuated his muscular build. He appeared to be a year or two older than me, yet his features were ageless. His rich chocolate-brown hair fell to his shoulders in gentle waves, framing his chiseled face perfectly. He wore a simple black suit, the only hint of color being the scarlet pocket square in his jacket. Very, very bad news, Ember whispered lowly in my ear, her voice startling me. I resisted the urge to turn and ask what she meant. Uncle Orion and the others were too close now, and there was no way I could whisper without them hearing. Shit, he sure is gorgeous for being someone that's bad, Kira murmured, sounding just as confused as I felt. I nodded slightly. He looks kind of familiar, doesn't he? I think so, she replied. My necklace began to buzz and heat up as my eyes lingered on the man. The sensation was beginning to irritate me. It acted like a second intuition, but its true nature remained frustratingly elusive. Uncle Orion approached with a tight-lipped smile, his expression just as strained as my father's. I gently pulled my arm from Dad's and patted his hand when he hesitated to let go. With a clueless smile plastered on my face, I approached the stunningly handsome yet vaguely familiar man. Magnus's dominating aura surrounded me, providing a comforting sense of safety. The man was accompanied by a younger version of himself, along with an older, large man and a dainty older woman. I could feel his dark, calculating eyes on my face as the necklace buzzed more insistently. I was surprised no one else could sense the power humming from it. "The beautiful and captivating Princess Aurelia," the man said, flashing me a dazzling smile that made me question why Ember was so wary of him. How could someone so stunning be so dangerous? "We can only see his outer beauty, Aurelia. We have no idea what lies beneath," Kira's voice murmured in my mind, dousing me in a chilling wave of realization. Wiping the emotion from my face was easy, but keeping it from my eyes was a different challenge. They say the eyes are the windows to the soul, and mine were in danger of betraying me. I let my eyes widen slightly, feigning confusion as I stared at the man before me. "I am Aurelia, but I'm afraid I don't know who you are," I said softly, trying to project an air of innocence. The man's gaze was steely, though a flicker of amusement danced in his eyes. I had the unsettling sense that he saw right through my act. "Mason Beaumont, my dear princess." He inclined his head, a dazzling smile still playing on his ethereal features. "Is this your family?" I asked, keeping my tone polite as I turned to smile at the others. The delicate woman offered a grim smile, while the older man gave a curt nod. The younger version of Mason grinned at me, wide and sly. "My father Henry, my mother Nora, and my brother Liam." The names rang oddly in my mind, foreign and yet somehow familiar. I knew I would have remembered them if I'd encountered them before. "And is this your family, little princess?" Mason's smile took on a darker edge as he spoke, sending a shiver down my spine. His use of "little princess" felt wrong, almost mocking. It was clear he already knew who my family was. "This is my father, the Alpha King," I stated with pride, emphasizing my father's title. "My uncle Orion, and my assistant Ember." Mason's dark gaze flicked from me to Ember, amusement thick in his eyes. I felt Ember tense beside me, and I wondered what she knew about him that I didn't. "The little princess already has an assistant?" Mason chuckled, a sound that was meant to be charming, but only left me feeling unsettled. To anyone else, he appeared flawless, almost angelic, a creature of inhuman beauty radiating confidence and ease. But something about him felt off. He wasn't just playing the game, he relished it. He was an expert, and that was what made him dangerous. And who might this be? Mason's eyes shifted to the imposing figure behind me. I resisted the urge to glance back at Magnus or reveal the fondness I held for my silent protector. "This is my bodyguard, Magnus," I managed, keeping my voice steady despite the rapid pounding of my heart. Something dark flashed in Mason's gaze, but he quickly concealed it. It seemed for now he was satisfied with my answer. "Who would dare harm someone as angelic as yourself?" Mason's voice was laced with faux sympathy. He played the role well, his soft gaze and downturned lips forming the perfect picture of concern. If I hadn't known better, I might have been fooled by his act. "A few names come to mind." Kira growled in the back of my head. I kept Kira in check, though her distaste for Mason was evident. Wolves had strong instincts, and hers were screaming one word: predator. "One can never be too safe," I replied, allowing a small, knowing smile to play on my lips. It was a risk, but I was willing to take it. Mason read my expression like an open book. Unfortunately, I couldn't say the same for him. Something flickered in his eyes, but I couldn't quite grasp what it was. "You are certainly right, Princess," he said, his smile more convincing than mine. Mason extended his hand, and I braced myself for what I'd been dreading. "This guy better not be our mate," Kira snarled, pacing restlessly in my mind. I stepped closer, pushing my emotions deep down as Magnus shadowed me. Mason's gaze never wavered from mine as he took my small hand in his. I held my breath, counting the seconds. After 10, Mason's smile faltered, a flash of disappointment crossing his features. It was a strange look on him, disappointment without surprise. "I don't suppose I could convince you to join my side regardless, little princess?" Mason's smile returned, though I found myself struggling to breathe under its weight. Any other girl would have melted under his gaze. A fierce growl rumbled from behind me, and my eyes widened. I had never heard my father this angry. His growl silenced the guests around us, who stared at him in a mix of shock and fear. But Mason remained unfazed, his charming smile never wavering as he looked down at me. He didn't even acknowledge my father's fury. "Unfortunately, I must decline your generous offer," I replied, my own smile still in place, trying to maintain the facade of innocence. Mason was the most challenging lichen and royal I'd ever encountered, but I was determined to play the game. "Pity. Such a pretty face." Mason sighed as he released my hand, his disappointment more pronounced now. "A pretty face?" Kira growled. "I'll ruin that pretty little face." "Not now, Kira," I hushed her, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. "A pretty face, a pretty kingdom. It's all the same, isn't it, Mason?" I let his name roll off my tongue slowly, almost sensually. Something shifted in his dark eyes, and even his brother's gaze widened slightly. I had let too much slip, revealing that I was more than just a naive princess. They knew I was ready to play their game, and to men like them, a new player was an irresistible lure. My necklace hummed with power as I spoke, intensifying the strange emotion in the air. But Mason quickly masked it, his face returning to its usual knowing smile. "Enjoy the rest of your birthday, little princess," he said, grinning. "Until we meet again." Mason and his family turned and disappeared into the crowd. I heard my father quietly order his men to escort them out without causing a scene. The gentle music resumed, and the guests' wary glances soon faded. "What the hell was that, Aura?" My father was the first to speak, his voice a mix of anger and something else. I looked at him innocently. "What do you mean?" He rolled his eyes, exasperated. "Don't try that with me. I'll never underestimate you again." "Risky move, Aura," Uncle Orion muttered, fighting back a smile. "No kidding," Ember added, her voice low. She exchanged a glance with my father and uncle before mouthing the word, "Later." We made our way to the service table, and I managed to sneak a sip of wine as I nibbled on the food. Ember refused to say anything more about the Beaumonts, especially Mason. I had just lifted the glass to my lips when a sharp, deafening noise pierced the air. In that instant, everything descended into chaos. Every window in the ballroom shattered, sending shards of glass raining down on us and the nearby guests. And through each shattered window, masked figures began pouring in. Three things happened all at once. Every window around us shattered, sending shards of glass flying toward Ember, Magnus, and me. Masked figures leaped through the broken panes, adding to the chaos. Instinctively, I threw myself in front of Ember, shielding her from the sharp fragments that hurtled in our direction. Magnus was faster. He placed himself in front of both of us, absorbing most of the glass with his own body. The ballroom erupted into a frenzy. Panicked screams echoed from every corner as people scattered, some sprinting for safety, others collapsing to the ground in terror. Through the disarray, I spotted some of the masked intruders brandishing guns. My heart lurched as the deafening sound of gunfire filled the room. Everything was moving so fast that I barely registered the searing heat of my necklace against my skin. "Stay close to Magnus," I shouted at Ember, pulling her closer by her trembling arm. "Aurelia!" My father's voice cut through the chaos, calling out my name. "Aura, you should stick with Magnus." Kira's voice was equally frantic. "Screw that. I'm not leaving Dad," I snapped back, determination lacing my words. It might not have been the wisest choice, but the thought of losing the only parent I had left was unbearable. Navigating this royal life was already overwhelming. I couldn't imagine facing it alone if something happened to Dad. As gunfire continued to rain down on the terrified crowd, a strangled cry escaped my lips. People were dropping to the ground, but I couldn't tell if any were hit. Frozen in place beside Ember, I stared, unable to move. Then I locked eyes with one of the masked men, and a chill ran down my spine. His eyes were devoid of life, gleaming with a cruel, detached malice. My necklace burned even hotter against my chest, but I couldn't tear myself away. Magnus stood protectively in front of us, but I peeked around him, my gaze fixed on the masked man. He didn't speak, but his cold eyes met those of his companions, and he made a hand signal that set my nerves on edge. He pointed at his comrades, then directly at me. My blood turned to ice. A deep growl erupted from Magnus as the masked men surged forward. He moved like a freight train, dodging a bullet that whizzed past his head. I yanked Ember to the ground as Magnus charged, catching one of the intruders by the throat. Stay down, I ordered, shoving Ember against one of the service tables. She looked petrified, her honey-colored eyes wide as they took in the chaos around us. Don't you dare, Aurelia, Ember hissed, digging her nails into my wrist, her golden eyes blazing with intensity. You'll be safe here. Stay out of sight, I insisted, prying her fingers from my wrist. And you'll stay with me, she snapped. I can't leave Dad, Ember, I shook my head, determined. I lifted myself from the floor and darted through the panicked crowd, sparing a glance at Magnus. He was ruthless, tearing into one of the men with a savage fury. They're after you, not him. Ember's voice rang out over the noise, but I was already moving, pushing through the throng of people. Amidst the chaos, I caught sight of a familiar shock of fiery hair on the white floor. It was Dylan Lancaster, sprawled on the ground, panic etched on his porcelain face. His hazel eyes darted around, wide with fear. I didn't hesitate. I shoved people aside and grabbed his arm, pulling him to his feet. Relief flashed in his eyes as he recognized me. Do you know anything about this? I yelled, my hands gripping his arms tightly. The heat from my necklace was almost unbearable, and I felt Kira's presence stirring within me, threatening to take over. I don't know anything, Dylan shouted back, his voice full of desperation. I swear I don't. There was no time to question him further. I clasped his wrist and pulled him along with me through the chaotic crowd. Where are we going? Dylan yelled, managing to keep pace. I need to find my dad, I shouted over my shoulder, my heart racing as I spotted a familiar head of curly hair. Uncle Orion was directing people toward a set of open doors, his expression grim and focused. Orion, I called out, nearly crashing into him with Dylan in tow. His eyes widened in shock at the sight of me. Aurelia, we couldn't find you, Uncle Orion said, his face flushed as he continued ushering people out. Why aren't more people leaving? I shouted, forcing myself to look away from the crimson stains on the once pristine floor. Someone locked the doors from the outside, Uncle Orion yelled back, his jaw clenched. There was no time to ask more questions. We need to go back to Magnus, Kira urged in my mind. No, we need to find Dad. Magnus is strong. He'll survive while we find him, I argued, though the thought made my stomach churn with guilt. I was being pulled in two directions, toward the man who was my only remaining family and the silent protector who held an inexplicable piece of my heart. Aurelia, you need to leave, Uncle Orion shouted, reaching out to grab my wrist. No, I pulled my arm away, resolute. Kira and I were in silent agreement. Leaving was not an option. I could only pray that Vesper had escaped the carnage and that it wasn't her blood staining the floor. Glaring stubbornly at Uncle Orion, I snapped, We don't have time for this. He hesitated, then shook his head, seeming to remember the chaos around us. Follow me. I saw him just a minute ago. I followed Uncle Orion through the thinning crowd, glancing back to see Dylan trailing us. Despite my wariness about his family, he didn't seem like a bad person. I couldn't imagine what it was like to be the heir to a kingdom while your own family schemed against you. We stopped when the crowd thinned further. Uncle Orion looked around frantically, and a dreadful feeling settled in my gut. He was right. Uncle Orion started to say, but his words were cut off as someone appeared behind him. One of the masked attackers closed in behind Uncle Orion, knocking him to the ground. The sickening sound of his head hitting the porcelain floor echoed in my ears. All the months of training I had undergone hadn't prepared me for this moment. The masked man raised his gun, aiming it directly at my face. Everything else seemed to speed by in a blur, but this moment dragged on, excruciatingly slow. I found myself wondering how Magnus had become such a skilled fighter, even as I stood there, muscles locked in place, staring down the barrel of the gun. An entire kingdom rested on my shoulders, and it felt like everything was about to be taken from me. Suddenly, a flash of orange darted in front of me, snapping me out of my horrified stupor. Dylan had thrown himself at the masked man, claws extended as he knocked the gun aside. It was obvious Dylan wasn't a trained fighter. The masked man easily tossed him aside and scrambled for his weapon. Snap out of it. Kira's voice growled in my mind. The combined burning of my necklace and Kira's strength surging through me jolted me from my daze. I lunged forward, my feet moving with a strength I hadn't known I possessed, driving me towards the masked man just as he reached for his gun. I landed on his torso, claws extending from my hands as I drove them into his chest with all the force I could muster. In the back of my mind, a part of me was panicking. I never thought I'd actually have to kill someone. My training had always felt like a precaution, something I'd never truly need. The man beneath me grunted and thrashed, but I held on, teeth clenching painfully as he raked his claws against my dress. I felt a wet, sticky sensation on my side, but the pain didn't register. My focus was entirely on the man beneath me. What would a lichen be doing with a gun? Kira's question barely registered in my mind as I concentrated on ending the man's life. My arms burned as I forced my claws deeper into his chest, not daring to pull them back until his body stopped thrashing and his breathing ceased. I wanted to collapse, to sob in horror at what I had just done, but something within me kept me moving. My gown was torn to shreds, blood staining the deep emerald fabric, yet I somehow found the strength to stand. I extended a hand to Dylan, pulling him to his feet. "You saved my life," I said, meeting his strange hazel eyes. Something within me shifted, a desperate need to trust Dylan blossoming. The only other royal I knew I could rely on was Zane, and I needed someone else on my side. "You owe me a debt," Dylan replied breathlessly, and though his words made me uneasy, I knew I had to trust him for now. "If we survive this, we can discuss that later," I muttered, my eyes scanning the chaotic ballroom. Dylan gave a brief nod. "We can't just stay out in the open." I nodded, agreeing as I noticed how the frantic crowd made it difficult to spot the masked men among them. Kira's voice echoed in my mind, urging me to find Magnus. "We need to go to Magnus," I snapped at Dylan, plunging into the crowd without waiting for his response. It only took a few minutes to locate Magnus, but the sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. He was on his knees, staring down the barrel of a gun, surrounded by at least 10 masked men, far more than I had seen earlier. The masked man with the gun aimed at Magnus said something that made Magnus's eyes blaze with fury. His mask lay discarded on the floor, and if his life wasn't hanging by a thread, I might have taken a moment to marvel at his ethereal beauty. Even in this dire moment, Magnus looked like a god, his chiseled jawline, the hint of chocolate stubble along his chin and cheeks, and his full lips stained with blood. Ember was tucked away near a server's table, her golden eyes frantic as they met mine, but she remained unnoticed. A brief surge of relief filled me, but it was quickly overshadowed by the terror of the situation. "Magnus!" I shouted, my voice surprising even me. It rang out strong and authoritative, filled with a power I hadn't known I possessed. Magnus's gaze snapped to mine, and my breath caught in my throat. The masked man cocked his gun, and something new and terrifying surged within me. The necklace around my neck burned unbearably hot, as if searing my flesh, and I felt a dam of raw power and fury burst inside me. "No," the word tore from my lips in a howl of agony and rage as the power within me exploded outward. My arms flung out to my sides, and I felt a wave of raw energy rush through me, unstoppable and fierce. All I could think about was saving Magnus. With my arms still outstretched and my head thrown back, I heard 10 heavy thuds echo across the floor, Magnus's POV. If I had foreseen the fate awaiting the little princess's mother, perhaps I would have reconsidered my path. Only 20 minutes had passed before I crossed paths with someone from my past, a face I knew all too well. They were not old friends, as many might assume. My life was a tapestry of enmities, each thread woven from betrayal and deceit, a past I had once vowed to leave behind. "You traded one life for another steeped in violence," your Fang's voice echoed disapprovingly. I sighed, acknowledging the rift between us on such matters. "It was necessary, Fang. Violence has always been our shadow. Now we wield it by choice." As I distanced myself from the emerald-eyed princess and the perceptive gaze of her mother, I stumbled upon a ghost from my chaotic past. Few remembered me for who I once was. Those who did had long been silenced, their histories buried with them. "Какой surprise, Magnus! What a surprise!" A voice from my past rasped, a twisted chuckle following the words. I met the cold, dead eyes of a man I had wished to forget. Tiberius, his eyes a sickly green, in stark contrast to the vibrant gaze of the princess I had been ordered to kill. Tiberius was one of the few who held the knowledge of a history many had tried to erase. Long ago, he had been the mate of a royal, a young woman whose life he had destroyed in his pursuit of power. His madness had led to a botched coup, leaving the eldest daughter's mate dead and driving the middle daughter to take her own life. Though deranged, Tiberius retained his cunning, making him all the more dangerous. Killing him would provoke consequences far beyond my control. Vile creature, Fang growled within me. Tiberius had fled the kingdom and established a pack of rogues, a mockery of the life he once led. Once a sought-after bachelor, he now stood before me, a shadow of his former self, with lifeless hair and hollow cheeks, bearing the scars of a rogue's existence. "What do you want, Tiberius?" I snarled, my voice thick with the accent of my childhood, the only remnant of a life long abandoned. "Nichivo от тебя." "Nothing from you," Tiberius sneered, revealing teeth as rotten as his soul. "What business do you have here?" I demanded, feeling the power within me stir, ready to strike. Fang had always despised Tiberius and his underhanded dealings. "Здесь по делу, Magnus. С чем вы когда-то были знакомы." "Here on business, Magnus, something you were once familiar with." Tiberius's expression twisted into a contemptuous sneer. I resisted the urge to dig deeper, to demand answers, but I knew better. The glint in his eyes betrayed his smugness. He knew I couldn't afford to push further. My mere presence here was a risk, one that could cost me dearly. Grinding my teeth, I brushed past him, slamming my shoulder into his as I did. "One day, we'll put that rat down," Fang spat, echoing my thoughts. "Уезжаете без прощания? Некоторые вещи не меняются." Are you leaving without saying goodbye? Some things never change. Though there was no sorrow in his voice. I turned my back on him, making my first mistake. The news reached me a week later. Queen Luna Callista Carrington had been brutally murdered in a rogue attack. Princess Aurelia Carrington had lost her mother. I needed no further details to know Tiberius was behind it. That kind of savage brutality was his trademark. The irony wasn't lost on me, speaking of Tiberius's monstrosities when I was capable of the same. Capable, yes, but we don't revel in it as Tiberius does, Fang growled. He was right. While I intended to kill the princess, I had no desire to do so in front of her parents. Her death would be swift, a mercy in a world where true innocence was a rarity. As weeks turned into months, I found myself haunted by the memory of the green-eyed girl. Though my task remained, something held me back. I had been raised to suppress emotion, yet something about her made me question all I had known. Her gaze seemed to follow me, reflecting in the eyes of each life I took. The more I researched my marks, the more selective I became, targeting only the corrupt. Slowly, her eyes ceased to haunt me. But every few weeks, I found myself back in the forest where I first saw her, her father's security growing tighter with each visit. 2 months had passed since my last visit, yet thoughts of her lingered. One evening, unable to bear the pull any longer, I found myself drawn towards her kingdom. The need to see her, to experience her innocence, gnawed at me as if it could somehow cleanse my soul. Driving through the night, I arrived in a town near the Carrington kingdom. I had no clear destination in mind, only the compulsion to be near. Pulling over, I stepped out, pulling my hood low over my face. The Carrington kingdom was ancient. There could be those who remembered the old ways. Fang remained silent as I walked down the bustling sidewalk, the scent of pastries and coffee mingling with the sounds of laughter. Something joyous was happening, though I paid it no mind. I had never believed in fate. As a child, I was taught to forge my own destiny, to fight for it, even kill for it. Fate was a crutch for the weak, a notion for those unwilling to seize control. Lost in thought, I didn't notice the small figure until she collided with me. My hands instinctively reached out, gripping smooth skin. For a heartbeat, time stood still. A dark-haired girl looked up, her emerald eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't yet recognized the danger she had stumbled into. "It's her!" Fang's voice echoed, struck silent by the realization. Sparks, flames, shivers. An electric charge shot through me, a sensation I had only ever read about. The girl with the emerald eyes was like a live wire, threatening to bring me to my knees. "I'm sorry, sir." Aurelia Carrington's soft voice broke the silence between us. I watched her lips form the words, her eyes squinting as she tried to see beneath my hood. She seemed oblivious to the energy crackling between us. "She doesn't know," Fang murmured, entranced by the little creature before us. "She hasn't turned 18 yet." For the first time in my life, I found myself at a loss for words. Suppressing the overwhelming urge to pull the princess into my arms, I turned away, my heart heavy. "Mate," Fang whispered in sorrow. "She's too innocent for someone like us," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions tearing at me. "We would destroy her." Magnus's POV. Once I had turned my back on the little princess, I devoted every ounce of my will to erasing her from my thoughts. I would not allow this green-eyed beauty to be the cause of my undoing. I had crafted a semblance of a new life for myself, a life steeped in violence, but one in which I had excelled. Hours from my latest location, on the edge of a different kingdom, news of the first 3 attacks reached me. The Carrington kingdom had been struck, leaving behind 3 lifeless bodies. What troubled me was the disturbing trend. Each corpse was found closer and closer to the Carrington mansion. "Someone else is after our mate," Fang growled within my mind. "We'll investigate for her safety," I replied, though my resolve was already wavering. The moment her eyes had met mine and those sparks had jolted through me, I knew I could no longer go through with her death. Raised to view the mate bond as mere convenience, I had never considered I might actually need one. I had been too steeped in my own transgressions, believing that someone like Aurelia Carrington was cursed to be linked with me. I found myself at a nearly empty bar, the moon having hung in the sky for hours. I stared at the number on my phone, a number I had dialed countless times over the years. As always, the line connected on the first ring. "Dante, I assumed you were occupied with your latest assignment," came the deep, raspy voice on the other end. In this line of work, personal connections were a luxury I couldn't afford. Secrets meant targets, and ignorance was a shield. I spoke in a low, controlled tone, lacing my words with concealed anger. "Others have been assigned this task, haven't they?" Clearly, the contract on Princess Aurelia Carrington had been thrown open to any would-be assassin, attracting those less skilled. The pursuit of money had made the task a free-for-all. "They have. The reward is too tempting to keep exclusive," the voice confirmed. A growl rumbled from my throat. "You realize others are making a mess of things." "I'm aware, yet I have confidence that Dante will succeed," the voice replied with a hint of sarcasm. Indeed, I would succeed. But the man was unaware of my change of heart. I had no intention of killing the princess. Fang had ensured that, and I found myself committed to protecting her instead. "This requires more planning." I growled, "Do you have any other tasks in the meantime?" After a brief silence, the voice responded, "I do. It's not as lucrative, but it's significant." "Give me the details," I demanded. "Dylan Lancaster," came the reply. "Lancaster?" Fang questioned. "Another royal?" "Their games continue," I grimaced. The royals were notorious for their intricate and ruthless power plays, and I was all too familiar with their tactics. "I'll see what I can do," I said, leaving my response deliberately vague. Killing a royal was fraught with risk, with consequences reaching beyond the immediate task. I had made an exception for Princess Aurelia. Her innocence had been too compelling to ignore. As the call ended, I knew I couldn't ignore Fang's warning about becoming entangled in royal politics again. Yet the Lancaster kingdom held its own intrigue, and I needed to understand if the same entity was behind both hits. Only a day in Lancaster, I received unsettling news from Carrington. The king, perceptive enough to see the danger to his daughter, was seeking a suitable bodyguard for Princess Aurelia. "A bodyguard," Fang mused. "We would be the best to protect her." "You're right," I conceded reluctantly. I knew agreeing with Fang meant I would no longer be able to distance myself from the princess. I returned to the Carrington kingdom with renewed urgency, the target Dylan Lancaster now forgotten. Gaining an audience with the king was a grueling process of scrutiny and questioning. When I finally stood before him, the striking resemblance between Princess Aurelia and her mother was undeniable. Fang and I stood silently as the king's formidable presence enveloped us. It was clear why he ruled the largest lichen kingdom. His people both revered and feared him, a testament to his exceptional rule. I noted with surprise that the king seemed to bypass the usual royal games. Ignoring such politics was a perilous choice, but one that could also be advantageous. "He will remember the old ways," Fang whispered. "He will recognize who we are." "It's too late to turn back," I replied. "The princess must be protected." The king's gaze was sharp, his silver eyes revealing layers of discernment. What name do you use now? Magnus, I answered simply. Magnus, the king repeated, as if weighing the name. Fitting. I thought so, I agreed with a nod. The king's demeanor shifted as he addressed me. I am aware it was you who first accepted the contract on my daughter. Explain why I shouldn't end you where you stand. The Alpha King's power was overwhelming, but I met it with my own. Speak to my wolf, I said, allowing Fang to make contact with him mentally. Having another speak to your wolf required mastery and trust. Wolves were direct and truthful, a contrast to the deceit often seen among royals. Do not mention our past encounters with his late wife, I cautioned Fang. The room fell into silence as the king communicated with Fang. Finally he spoke, his voice tinged with a rare vulnerability. My daughter is mated to you? I pressed my lips together, taken aback by Fang's revelation. You now know I could never harm her, I growled, my voice betraying a fierce protectiveness. The king's gaze softened slightly, revealing the weight of his struggles. She will eventually learn the truth, he remarked with a weary chuckle. Then she will discover it without my interference, I replied firmly. The king's eyes locked onto mine. If any harm befalls my daughter, I will erase every trace of you from history. I accepted the threat with a nod, while Fang bristled at the words. Your daughter will come to no harm, I assured him, Magnus's POV. In a twist of fate, or perhaps sheer madness, the Alpha King hired me as his daughter's bodyguard. The irony was almost unbearable. To say I was conflicted would barely scratch the surface. Here I was, having been hired to kill the very girl I was now assigned to protect. The bounty on her head had lured me, only for me to discover that she was my mate. The Alpha King, renowned and formidable, had knowingly placed his daughter under the protection of the man who had been sent to end her life. It was bewildering. Either the Alpha King had a keen sense of strategy beyond my reckoning, or he placed a profound trust in the mate bond's power. Whatever his reasoning, my internal conflict was settled the moment my gaze met hers. The Alpha King had introduced me to his daughter early that morning and led me to her chamber. Do not leave her side, not even for a moment, he instructed with an authority that brooked no argument. The black mask I wore itched uncomfortably against my skin, but it was a necessary evil. Concealing my identity was essential if I hoped to avoid being dragged back into the treacherous game of the royals. The king knocked on the door before entering at the sound of a soft, "Come in." The voice was as gentle and whimsical as I had imagined. The princess lay on her bed, engrossed in a book. Her raven hair cascaded over her shoulder like a silken river of night. I stood silently, captivated by the scene. Her delicate nose twitched as she detected my presence. When her eyes finally met mine, it was as if my heart stopped. Those emerald eyes, so bright and innocent, held a depth that was both mesmerizing and disconcerting. After a brief exchange with her father, the Alpha King departed, leaving me alone with her. The room was immediately filled with her sweet, intoxicating scent, a blend of creamy vanilla and something more complex. It was almost overwhelming. My ability to mask my emotions had been honed through years of practice, and today was no different. So, are you unable to speak? Her voice was soft, tinged with curiosity. I considered whether to respond. No, I said, the words slipping out almost against my will. Are you a warrior? She asked, her eyes filled with an unspoken question. No, I replied again, allowing a slight twitch of my lips. If only I were just a simple warrior, the situation might have been less complicated. Is that all you can say? No. Her voice, once curious, now carried a hint of irritation. No, I repeated, noting how her frustration grew with each monosyllabic response. As she moved closer, her curiosity evident, I couldn't help but be fascinated. She's quite the inquisitive one, isn't she? Fang commented with a note of amusement. I growled, curiosity is dangerous for someone so innocent, especially a royal. True, Fang sighed, but she's undeniably captivating. Her hand reached tentatively toward my face, trembling slightly. My reflexes surprised her as I grasped her wrist gently. No, I said for the final time. I let my gaze linger on her emerald eyes, imagining a life where our paths had crossed under different circumstances. When I finally released her wrist, it fell limply by her side. It struck me how quickly she became disinterested. Perhaps she had already grown weary of her silent guardian. If only I had known the depth of her impact. Princess Aurelia had a wild side, tempered by an innocence that was uniquely hers. I found myself charmed as I watched her steal a muffin from the kitchens. Isn't she a princess? Couldn't she just take what she wants? Fang sounded puzzled. She could, I nodded. But this kingdom values kindness and respect. It's different. Interesting, Fang mused. Her attempts to sneak around the kitchens were endearing. If things were different, I might have shown her how to be more successful. An older woman, her skin dark as freshly brewed espresso, watched Aurelia with a knowing smirk as she took the muffin. I couldn't resist wiping a bit of chocolate from her porcelain face. The blush that spread across her cheeks was reminiscent of blooming roses. I imagined her skin as soft as the petals. She's making us sentimental, Fang growled. Is this normal? I frowned. I'm beginning to think the Alpha King was right about the mate bond's power, Fang admitted, sharing my growing attachment. After Aurelia finished her muffin, I met her friend Ember. The golden-eyed girl seemed close to her, but her intense gaze unsettled me. Afraid of a child? Fang scoffed. There's no fear, only a sharp intelligence, I countered. My first day went as planned until the princess decided to visit a local coffee shop. I struggled to contain my rage and jealousy when a young man approached her. Later that evening, Aurelia was seething with anger, demanding to know why I had chased the boy away. I avoided answering, retreating before I could say something regrettable. Driven away by a child, Fang growled. And what would you have me do? I retorted. You know the answer, Fang said, presenting images of Aurelia in her undergarments, stirring an inner conflict. That night, dreams of what might have been haunted me. The kingdom was changing me, but into what, I wasn't sure. A gasp pulled me from sleep. The scent of blood filled the air, and I acted on instinct. The shock on Aurelia's face as I burst into the bathroom was clear. I carefully tended to her bleeding foot, ignoring her state of undress. As she dressed, I struggled to keep Fang's urges at bay. The wolf within was a slave to its desires, though my human side held more control. I hadn't anticipated the challenge of restraining both sides of myself. Look down, Magnus, she teased, her eyes darkened with power. The dare in her gaze triggered a response from Fang. For the first time, I surrendered to the temptation. My eyes wandered over her exposed skin, lingering on her chest and thighs. The thin fabric of her tank top clung to her form, making it difficult to look away. In that moment, the princess had won this round. The weeks that followed were relatively smooth, though secrets and hidden agendas lingered. The princess was far more perceptive than I'd given her credit for. She suspected something and was determined to uncover the truth. Though Ember had repeatedly proven her worth, my regard for her companion was far less generous. The infuriating little blonde Vesper seemed to take a particular delight in aggravating the princess. Often I found myself in heated debates with Fang, who was all too eager to seize Vesper by the hair and toss her aside. Everything shifted the night Princess Aurelia decided to clandestinely enter my room. I had sensed her intentions. The resolve on her face had been unmistakable throughout the day. Her restless anticipation for bedtime had been a giveaway. As I lay in bed, fully prepared, my body responded of its own accord. I had turned her over, and my resolve faltered as I took in her state of undress. The scent of her arousal jolted me back to reality, creating a tempest of indecision within me. She wants us, Fang growled, his voice thick with desire. Fully. I understood her desires, and my own longing surged in response, yet something restrained me. She knows nothing about us, I murmured. We cannot exploit her innocence. Fang was adamant, wholly captivated by the young princess. I had every intention of locking my door and seeking solace in sleep, but an inexplicable force held me back, something even I could not suppress. Magnus, her breathless whisper, her name on her lips, was a mixture of pleasure and longing. Fang seized control completely, and I not only permitted it, but aided him. Magnus, she whimpered enticingly as I had her pinned against the wall. Please. Her soft, lust-laden plea nearly shattered my remaining restraint. Your father, I managed to force out, struggling to keep my composure. The mate bond's overwhelming hunger, a craving for another's flesh and soul, was undeniable. Who cares what he thinks? The princess's breathless challenge came. Her cheeks flushed with desire as she looked at me with unmasked hunger. What would he think if I made love to his little tease of a daughter? The words were a growl, heavy with the accent I had chosen to retain. "Why don't you show me, and we can find out?" she replied slowly, her words laced with a strange, vulgar allure from such an innocent mouth. The thought of being the only one to hear those words from her sent me spiraling. Her small hand guided mine to her full breasts, and I surrendered greedily. As my self-control crumbled, I pressed her against the wall once more, pinning her hands beneath mine. My lips itched beneath the mask, yearning for the taste of her sweet skin. My gloved hand roamed to the tender spot between her legs. The intense urge to kneel and savor her sweetness was agonizing. I longed to see her unravel on my tongue, to bring her to the brink of ecstasy. I traced her slit with my gloved fingers, the thick moisture on my glove allowing for easy entry. Without allowing her any time to adjust, I thrust my finger inside her, my gaze locked on her ethereal face. Her porcelain skin flushed under my touch, and her lips parted, releasing breathless cries of pleasure that I was orchestrating. Her head fell back against the wall as she neared climax. "Look at me," I growled, determined to witness the ecstasy painting her flawless features. Her emerald eyes locked onto mine as she reached her peak, beginning to unravel before me. After that night, I made every effort to avoid the princess. Night after night, my dreams tormented me with visions of her. Her touch had awakened a primal side within me, a beast I had long suppressed. Every encounter with her was a battle against my own desires. The longing to tear her clothes off and claim her consumed my waking thoughts. As her 18th birthday approached, fear of what would transpire weighed heavily on me. She looked like an angel in her emerald gown, adorned with the mysterious necklace her mother had worn. I could have sworn I heard the necklace humming, as if alive. What could possibly change? Would she be heartbroken upon discovering she hadn't found her mate? How long before a mistake revealed my true identity? The princess's birthday gala had become a battleground for her attention. Men flocked around her, each yearning for a mere touch. The stakes were high. A single gesture could alter their destinies forever. Throughout the evening, Fang and I waged a relentless struggle against the onslaught of hopeful suitors. Each eager man only fueled our ire, and by the midpoint of the night, I found myself teetering on the edge of violence, ready to eliminate them all. The royal families posed another formidable challenge. Zane Hawthorne, the ruler of the fifth largest kingdom and a childhood friend of Princess Aurelia, was one I would allow to live. His genuine care for her was evident, and he sought nothing but her well-being. Evander Winslow, sovereign of the fourth largest kingdom, represented a different threat. His family had always been a collection of shallow opportunists desperate for a taste of true power. Dylan Lancaster, the ruler of the third largest kingdom, was less of a concern personally. However, the women in his family were notorious for their ruthlessness. I questioned whether sparing Dylan Lancaster had truly been a favor. Mason Beaumont, heir to the second largest kingdom, was a different beast entirely. The Beaumont family, the most dangerous in the world, wielded power with their wealth, connections, and a deep-seated animosity toward the Carrington family. Their reputation was one of fear and loathing. To my astonishment, Princess Aurelia stood her ground against Mason Beaumont. She made it clear that she was not merely a pawn in her father's game, but a formidable player in her own right. Her declaration was subtle yet unmistakable. Amid the gala's chaos, Mason Beaumont's composure faltered, if only for a moment, when Aurelia uttered, "A pretty face, a pretty kingdom. It's all the same, isn't it, Mason?" The words slipped from her lips with an air of lost control, causing a flicker of surprise to cross Mason Beaumont's face. Although the moment was fleeting, I caught it. Princess Aurelia had just declared her entrance into the most perilous of games. The first move was evident when every window in the ballroom shattered and a masked man emerged from the debris. In the ensuing chaos, Aurelia managed to slip past me, as my focus was consumed by the need to neutralize the masked intruders. More men poured in through the windows, and I wondered how they had bypassed security. It was not entirely surprising. Royals had a knack for getting what they wanted. The leader forced me to my knees, the cold barrel of a gun pressed against my forehead. I harbored no fear of death. It was a constant companion in the life I led, an inevitability that I embraced with a sense of grim acceptance. Yet I could not face death without the princess knowing the truth about me. As I looked into the eyes of Tiberius, dull, poisonous green, a stark contrast to my little princess' vibrant emerald, he flashed a sinister grin. Mason передает привет. Mason sends his regards, he taunted, his words dripping with malicious satisfaction, Aurelia's POV. I had just 5 seconds to take in the chaos around me. Magnus was on his knees, only 10 feet away, his full lips twisted into a disbelieving frown as his obsidian eyes locked onto mine. The men who had surrounded him lay crumpled on the floor, their bodies forming eerie heaps scattered across the porcelain surface, now marred with splatters of blood. A distant worry crept into my mind. Had innocent lives been lost today? The necklace that had once burned against my skin was now ice cold. My vision began to blur, and before I could even process my legs giving way beneath me, darkness swallowed my world. I woke to the feel of a cool hand on my forehead and the sound of a familiar, high-pitched voice. I kept my eyes shut, trying to make sense of the conversation around me. "Is she going to be all right?" Vesper's voice cut through the air, laced with panic, followed by the sound of her sobbing. I heard someone shuffle their feet and felt that cool hand press against my forehead again. Relief washed over me at the sound of Vesper's voice. She was being overly dramatic, which meant she wasn't hurt or too emotionally scarred from what had turned out to be a horrific birthday. "She'll be fine, Vesper." Ember's exasperated voice filled the room. The doctor already checked her. He said she collapsed from exhaustion. Ember's voice was a soothing balm to my ears. Even though she sounded calm, I could pick up on the underlying fear in her tone. Vesper might have been good at shaking off things like this, but Ember was definitely stressed. Not that I could blame her. Exhaustion tugged at my eyelids, and I drifted back into the darkness. I floated in that blissful state between sleep and consciousness, where I could hear everything around me, but lacked the energy to open my eyes. "Take it," a quiet voice hissed. "You heard what he said," another voice replied, closer this time, its tone low. "It won't work." My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't tell if what I was hearing was real or just a dream. Faces from my birthday gala flashed through my mind. "What does he know?" The voice farther away growled, louder this time. "He only wants it for himself." "Quiet, fool," the closer voice snarled. "Do you want to wake her? We should just kill her and be done with this." The voice farther away growled again. "We can't," the other hissed. "The boss isn't done with her yet." "Fine," came the reluctant growl. "But don't say I didn't warn you." I fought the urge to jolt awake, forcing myself to remain completely still. My mind swirled with hazy, sleep-filled questions. Who was this boss, and what did he want with me? What were they trying to take from me? Who were they? Was this really happening? 2 of my questions were answered when I felt rough fingers graze my collarbone, inching closer to the necklace I wore. "She's such a pretty little thing. She wouldn't have lasted a day in the old times," the one touching me murmured nastily. "Enough," the other voice hissed. "We don't have time for that. Someone could check on her any minute." The one touching my neck let out a low growl as his fingers wrapped around the necklace my dad had given me. The moment his fingers touched it, something strange happened. A loud shriek tore from his mouth, followed by the sickening stench of burning flesh. The necklace lay against my neck, cool as ever. "Quiet, quiet," the other man growled. "I told you it wouldn't work," the burnt man hissed in pain. "Stupid thing burned me." Heavy footsteps sounded from the room next to me, and the men scrambled. I heard a door creak open quietly, and I prayed that no more men had come to join them. In times like these, I desperately missed Kira. She was still deep in the back of my mind, unconscious from the events of my birthday. I kept my body completely still, waiting for whoever had entered the room to reveal themselves. But instead of hearing anything, I felt something. A strange sensation traced down my face, and it took me a moment to realize it was someone's finger. But it didn't feel like human skin. This was something thicker, smoother. Magnus. The moment I thought of him, something clicked in my mind. I felt his gloved hand softly tracing down my cheek, and I relaxed into the pillows, allowing myself to drift back into darkness. When I finally managed to open my eyes, I was overwhelmed by blinding light. The sun poured through the curtains in harsh shades of orange and white, making me shut my eyes tightly. After a few minutes of blinking away tears, I could finally see clearly. My mouth was parched and my body ached, a painful reminder of how my birthday had gone so wrong. The first face I saw was my dad's. His silver eyes were a mix of worry, relief, fear, and happiness, all etched into his aging features. "Dad?" The word came out as a hoarse whisper. The sound of my voice seemed to snap him into action. He hurried to my side, lifting a glass of water from the table and placing it gently in my hands. I gulped it down quickly, shifting my legs so he could sit on the bed next to me. "You had me terrified," he said, shaking his head and keeping his eyes fixed on me. I managed a weak smile. "I told you I didn't want to party." Dad let out a tired chuckle. "Good to see you still have your humor." "Dad, what happened?" I asked, my smile fading as I saw the exhaustion etched on his face. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed deeply. "Things aren't as safe here as they should be," he said, his gaze drifting to Magnus, who was standing across the room. His presence made my heart skip a beat. I recalled last night, the hazy memory of his hand on my face. Magnus was standing against the wall, dressed entirely in black. His mask and gloves were exactly as I remembered. The night was a blur, but I distinctly remembered seeing his face without the mask. It had been as flawless as I'd imagined. Thinking about him on his knees, moments away from death, sent a shiver down my spine. Why did the thought of Magnus dying unsettle me so much? "This is the biggest kingdom in the world," I said, frowning. "How could it not be safe?" "Being in the biggest kingdom means more subjects, more potential traitors," Dad sighed. "I've known for a while that some weren't loyal, but I never expected this." "It's not your fault, Dad," I said firmly. "Why would anyone be disloyal to you? You've been nothing but kind and caring." "I've only resorted to cruelty and violence when absolutely necessary," Dad replied, "but there will always be those whose loyalties lie elsewhere." He pursed his lips, and I struggled to grasp the concept. Why would anyone betray a kingdom that genuinely cared for its people? A sudden thought struck me, recalling the men who had entered my room the previous night. "Dad, what are the old days?" I blurted out, driven by an urgent need to know. The room seemed to darken in response, a brief flicker of tension passing between Dad and Magnus. Magnus's eyes locked onto mine, holding something ancient and inscrutable. "Where did you hear that term, Aura?" Dad's voice was calm but carried a dangerous edge. I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "I think I heard it from one of the masked men at my birthday gala." While I trusted my dad completely, something told me to keep quiet about the men in my room until I understood more. It was clear he was still shielding me, so I knew he wouldn't reveal anything that might put me in danger. "It's not something we discuss," Dad said solemnly, and I sighed. I knew from his reaction that he wouldn't elaborate, but I still held out hope for answers. "Where's my wolf, Dad?" I asked, worried about Kira, who I felt was still unconscious. "Your wolf's energy was completely drained, and so was yours," Dad said with a frown. "She'll be out of commission for a couple of days. It was a stressful night, wasn't it?" "It was," I replied, my frown deepening. "Did anyone die at the gala?" "It was going to be tough without Kira. I wouldn't be able to smell or hear things as a normal lichen could. My ability to shift was also on hold for now. I still had enhanced strength, but that was about it." Dad hesitated for a moment, making my heart pound. "Yes, there were a few casualties." Tears threatened to spill, but I fought them back. Now wasn't the time for tears. "I want us to cover the funeral costs," I said firmly, weighed down by grief for the deceased and their families. "And we will make sure their families are taken care of," Dad assured me. "It's the least we can do." Even in my weakened state, I sensed a strong, unique energy in the room, one intertwined with authority and bloodline power. Dad nodded, a strange look in his eyes. "It's remarkable how much you've changed in these few days." "Don't worry," I said with a humorless chuckle. "I still feel completely lost most of the time." Dad stayed as long as he could, updating me on the new security measures going into effect the next day. Magnus and I were moving to a more secure wing of the mansion, and Dad was bringing in extra guards from the surrounding regions to assist during this crisis. When Dad finally left, Beta Jackson entered the room. His face lit up with a smile when he saw me sitting up. "Good to see you up, Princess." He greeted me with a grin. Beta Jackson had been a close family friend for years. His first mate had died a decade ago, and he had only recently remarried. His new wife, Olivia, was a lovely woman. Though Dad had struggled with Jackson's decision to remarry, he eventually gave his blessing. "I heard you had quite the birthday," Beta Jackson said with a chuckle, though his eyes were serious. Jackson had always been like a second father to me, much like Uncle Orion. He was imposing in appearance, huge and muscular, a testament to his past as a formidable warrior. Although he disliked politics, he was glad Dad had given him this position. "That's an understatement," I huffed, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Any luck finding your mate?" Beta Jackson asked wistfully, and my heart ached at the question. "Unfortunately, no," I replied, shaking my head, "but it'll happen in time. How was your vacation?" Jackson shared stories about his month-long trip with Olivia, which had been a belated honeymoon. After our chat, I was left alone with Magnus as the servants brought in dinner. "How are you feeling, Princess?" Minda asked with a small smile as she set the dinner cart next to my bed. "I've been better, Mimi," I sighed. "But at least I'm alive." Minda giggled, revealing her gleaming teeth. "That's definitely a blessing, Princess." Once the servants left, the air was thick with unspoken words between Magnus and me. I wasn't sure what to say. "Hey, I'm glad you didn't die," or "I'm relieved you're alive because I'm drawn to you," didn't seem right. I missed Kira deeply. She was my closest companion. As I ate quietly, I struggled to find the right words. Kira would have known exactly what to say to bridge the gap between Magnus and me. "It's so quiet without my wolf," I finally broke the silence, squirming under Magnus's intense gaze. The night had fallen, and my energy was dwindling, like a battery struggling to recharge. "She'll come back." Magnus's rough voice cut through the silence, and I clung to each word. "Go to sleep, little princess." My eyes were already fluttering closed as Magnus moved the food cart away from my bed. The term little princess had been echoing in my mind ever since Magnus left for his own room. I remembered how Mason used the very same term to address me, making me feel like an inexperienced child trying to fit into a world of adults. But the way Magnus said it felt different, like a compliment, like I was something special. Something strange nudged me from my bed, not a sound or a smell, but a sense urging me to get up and leave my room. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, shivering as my bare feet touched the cold floor. Dressed in an old t-shirt and shorts, I was immediately chilled by the house's frigid air. I wasn't surprised when Magnus appeared, clad in his usual mask and gloves, dressed in a black tank top and loose shorts. My eyes wandered over his defined shoulders and strong arms before I forced myself to look away when he cleared his throat. Raising one dark eyebrow in question, he saw me place a finger to my lips, signaling him to be quiet. "Quiet," I whispered, turning my back and creeping down the hallway, guided by an inexplicable force. I moved aimlessly through the house until I heard muted voices. At the end of the hallway was a large balcony, where two hooded figures stood beneath the moonlight, speaking in hushed tones. My human senses were no help, so I turned to Magnus. "What are they saying?" I asked softly, leaning closer to him. I ignored his slight movement away from me. For once, physical contact was the least of my concerns. "They're talking about you," Magnus replied in a low murmur, his accent making his words difficult to decipher. "What about me?" I pressed, itching to inch closer. My gut told me to listen closely, though it didn't indicate whether the conversation was good or bad. It just urged me to stay alert. 10 men dead. They don't know the cause," Magnus continued, his thick accent twisting the words. My thoughts raced back to my birthday gala, the necklace's strange heat and the powerful surge that had come from within me. Could I really be responsible for those deaths? The idea made me sick. I couldn't believe I could commit mass murder. "They say your necklace has power," Magnus added, his dark eyes meeting mine. I bit my lip, questioning whether Magnus was truly trustworthy. My father's warning echoed in my mind about how people would want the necklace for themselves. "They're right," I murmured, meeting Magnus's gaze. Despite my wariness, something deep within me felt that Magnus was an exception to the rule. "They suspect someone is listening," Magnus said urgently. "We need to leave." With that, he swiftly guided me back to my bedroom. As much as I tried to rest, my mind was spinning. "I miss you, Kira," I whispered into the emptiness, feeling her quiet presence linger in the back of my mind. Finally, I was back in bed. Magnus had quietly withdrawn to his own room, leaving me alone with my tangled thoughts. The events of the night weighed heavily on my mind, demanding my attention. One undeniable truth stood out. What happened on my birthday was no spontaneous act of rebellion. It was a carefully orchestrated plan, meticulously executed. The shattering of the ballroom windows was more than just a moment of chaos. It was a message. The game had begun, and I was now an unwilling participant. First, it was clear that my necklace was a target. They knew of its power and were desperate to claim it. The thought that it couldn't be torn from my neck offered some comfort, but I couldn't shake the fear. What if I died? Would the necklace be theirs to take? I had a sinking suspicion it would be. Second, there was the horrifying possibility that I had been the cause of 10 men's deaths. 11, if I included the one Dylan and I had brought down together. My thoughts briefly drifted to Dylan. I'd have to ask my dad how he was doing. His mother and sister had always given me an uneasy feeling. The necklace had yet to reveal the nature of my ability, but if I was responsible for those deaths, what did that say about it? The idea that my power could be to cause instant death seemed absurd, yet what other explanation could there be? The confusion and stress left me yearning for comfort, and to my surprise, it was Magnus's face that came to mind. The thought only added to my bewilderment. Why did I long for a man so intensely when I knew my true mate was out there somewhere? A part of me wondered if my mate would be better off without me. If they were out there living a normal life, who was I to pull them into the dangerous game that royals seemed to relish? No one deserved to be dragged into this world. As sleep began to overtake me, thoughts of my future mate mingled with images of Magnus's chiseled face. But my slumber was short-lived. I awoke to the unsettling sensation of being watched, every hair on my body standing on end as I scanned the darkness of my room. It was pitch black, my human eyesight useless in the shadows. Suddenly, I felt something or someone crawling onto my bed. My body froze, my heart pounding in my chest. This felt like a scene from a horror movie. I couldn't see a thing, and my options were few. I could try to reach for the lamp on my bedside table, but what if they were faster? A scream threatened to escape as whatever it was lunged at me. But before I could react, a large hand clamped over my mouth, sending an electrifying sensation through me. Sparks. Whoever this was, they were my mate. My mind raced, unable to fathom who it could be, yet I was utterly captivated by their presence. The sparks coursed through my face, and any fear I had felt evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of comfort. I reached out with my senses, but to my frustration, I couldn't detect a scent. My mate simply smelled like a man. Kira, my wolf, shifted comfortably in her sleep, content in the presence of our mate. I heard the faint sound of movement, followed by the sensation of my arms being lifted above my head. I squirmed against my mate's grip as he secured my hands to the headboard with something rough and unyielding. Fear was impossible in the presence of my mate. Instead, a fiery desire ignited within me. My fingers ached to trace his face, to learn his features in the only way I could. "What?" I began, but my mate hushed me softly. "Shh," he whispered, and I grimaced at the realization of how useless my human senses were. His voice was deep, but that was all I could discern. It could have been any of the men I knew. A sharp intake of breath escaped me as I felt my t-shirt being lifted. Again, my mate hushed me, and I bit back a sigh. Still, I had no clue who he was. Instead of protesting, I stifled a quiet moan as his fingers traced delicate patterns along my stomach, sending a thrilling sensation straight to the core of my being. His fingers lightly teased the underside of my bare breasts, igniting a new and intense sensation within me. The sparks from his touch mixed with an overwhelming desire, and I felt my legs parting instinctively, surrendering to my mate's caress. His fingers finally traced over my breasts, stopping to gently pinch my nipples. The wetness soaking through my panties told me that the scent of my arousal must be thick in the air, though, with my wolf still dormant, I couldn't detect it. If only I could remember my mate's scent. Turning my head into the soft pillow, I released gentle moans as he took my breast into his mouth. His tongue skillfully flicked and nibbled at the sensitive flesh, while his other hand roughly grasped the other breast, as if my body had been perfectly shaped to fit his hands. All reason had vanished. I wanted him to take me, right here and now. As if he could hear my thoughts, his lips began trailing down my stomach, his touch leaving a path of sparks that scorched my skin and set my nerves on fire. My heart pounded harder as his fingers toyed with the waistband of my shorts, before slowly pulling them off. A low moan escaped into the pillow when one of his fingers pressed against my entrance, feeling the wetness that had soaked through my underwear. I used what little movement I could manage to press myself against his finger, a whimper slipping from my lips. Without hesitation, he removed my underwear, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. My teeth clenched together with an audible click as I felt his hot breath on the inside of my thigh. Being touched intimately was one thing, but having someone so close to me like this was both nerve-wracking and intoxicating. He trailed rough kisses along the inside of my thighs, and I whimpered impatiently. The combination of his rough touch and the fact that I was restrained only fueled the desire burning within me. I wanted nothing more than to feel him inside me, to surrender completely to his control. I jumped when his tongue flicked against my wet folds. A low moan escaped my mouth as his arms wrapped around my thighs, roughly pulling me back to his mouth. Muffling my moans became nearly impossible as his mouth devoured me, and if it weren't for the pillow I buried my face into, I was sure I would have screamed. Whoever my mate was, he knew exactly what he was doing. His tongue flicked roughly over my clit, sending waves of sparks and pleasure crashing through me. The pressure built in my core as his tongue delved into my entrance, tasting the wetness he had caused. A breathless moan slipped from my lips as I felt his finger at my entrance. The pleasure from his tongue intensified as his finger slid inside me, the wetness sparing me from any discomfort. My head fell back, lost in the waves of pleasure washing over me. He had no intention of being gentle, and that only made me crave it more. I was completely at his mercy, and I could sense that he was enjoying this as much, if not more, than I was. His finger thrust into me roughly, while his tongue continued to lap at my clit. Within moments I began to unravel, a series of muffled whimpers escaping my lips as I fought the urge to scream in ecstasy. Wave after wave of pleasure rippled through me, and he continued to lap at my juices, his arms holding me firmly in place as my orgasm took over. I was left panting and trembling when he finally withdrew his tongue, but the desire for more still lingered. Part of me was satisfied, yet I still longed to feel him inside me. Even more, I wanted to look into his eyes and see the face of the man who had brought me to such heights. So dazed by pleasure, I hadn't noticed when my hands were finally freed. As quickly as I could, I sat up and flicked on the lamp beside my bed. My eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of him. But there was nothing, only a faint breeze from the slightly open window. My mate was already gone, Magnus's POV. In the last few days, I made 3 crucial mistakes. First, I allowed Aurelia to slip through my fingers when masked men infiltrated her birthday gala. I had never experienced true fear in my life. Facing death had always strengthened my resolve. You can't push someone to the brink of death if you fear it yourself. Death never frightened me. I was certain that one day I would meet my match, and it would end as I always expected, violently. Kneeling and staring down the barrel of Tiberius's gun, I felt nothing close to fear. But when I locked eyes with Princess Aurelia, I felt something I hadn't known before. Fear, like searing pinpricks across my skin. I feared dying without telling her the truth. I feared what would become of her after my last breath. Something shifted after her 18th birthday, something I hadn't foreseen. It was as if another consciousness had taken residence in my mind, someone other than Fang. Though I couldn't fully access a stream of thoughts, I started to experience odd sensations and emotions. It took me 48 hours to realize those sensations and emotions belonged to the little princess. Second, against my better judgment, I entered her room during the night. I couldn't resist running my hand down her face. I had been preparing for bed that night, with the little princess occupying my every thought, when something strange washed over me. It took a moment to recognize that it was coming from Aurelia. It wasn't a specific emotion, more of a heightened awareness of something. "We should check on her," Fang murmured, "just for a moment." My body moved on its own, disregarding my opinions. Her room was still, the kind of stillness that breeds suspicion. The only sound was the soft rhythm of her breathing. Thankful for the darkness, I moved closer to her bed. Fang enhanced my vision, eager for a glimpse of our sleeping princess. Even in the dark, her skin was creamy and flawless. Her plush lips were parted, with gentle breaths escaping into the air. Even in her sleep, she looked like an angel. It was cruel fate that paired her with someone like me. While I would protect her with my life, she was worth 1,000,000 of mine. "Have you ever seen anyone as perfect?" Fang murmured, pride evident as he gazed at our princess's innocent face. I shook my head slowly, my eyes fixed on her peaceful expression. "No, I haven't. My past isn't something I talk about, but I've had my share of sexual partners. I was raised to hide such affairs, yet to take what I pleased at any moment. Sex was always physical, an urge to find release in a life full of lies and deceit. Emotions never played a role in my sexual encounters. In my previous life, I was known for two things, sex and violence. Now, my life was solely focused on violence." The third mistake happened just a day later. After eavesdropping on a conversation between two strangers, I left the princess to her thoughts while I retreated to my own. My mind wandered back to the masked man who ordered a hit on the princess and his claims about the necklace she wore. Though his details were scarce, I hadn't considered that the necklace held any power. It was foolish to assume he wanted it for monetary or sentimental reasons. My curiosity was piqued. I wondered if the necklace had anything to do with the deaths of those masked men. It wasn't clear if Aurelia or the necklace caused their demise. Visually, there was no obvious connection. The princess simply threw her head back and screamed, and moments later, the men dropped dead. "There must be a way to learn more about their deaths," Fang murmured. "I'm sure her father is wondering the same," I replied. "There's a chance an autopsy will be conducted. I'm sure our little princess would like to know as well," Fang added. "She's quite inquisitive." Rightfully so. My lips twitched, fighting the urge to smirk. Princess Aurelia was relentless in her pursuit of the truth. That much was clear. She made it her mission to tempt us for weeks, stopping only when she had a taste of what we could offer. As I lay on my bed, sleep eluded me with the little princess lingering in my thoughts. Her angelic features dominated my mind, pushing sleep further away. Lying in the dark, with only Fang and the ethereal image of Aurelia for company, something began to stir within me. It wasn't from within. It was clear this something came from elsewhere. It took time for me to understand, for the sensations to become more defined. Those feelings evolved into a gentle nudge, eventually solidifying into a clear emotion. A deep longing swept through me, followed by a steady warmth of desire. "Our little princess wants us," Fang growled lowly, his own desire matching our mate's. "It may not be us she longs for," I reminded him. "She doesn't know we're her mate. Who else would she feel desire for?" Fang snarled, his jealousy flaring. Fang was always a jealous wolf, his possessiveness almost surpassing my own. Possessiveness is a trait most male wolves have. The stronger the wolf, the more primal the urge. Fang's jealous and angry thoughts chipped away at my self-control. His carefully planted thoughts were designed to provoke me, urging me to break down the door and claim our mate. Fang knew she wouldn't resist under our touch, that she would surrender and let us bring her to the edge of pleasure as we once did. The final straw was a calculated image of our princess with the polished, royal Zane. I rose from the bed with an agitated snarl, cursing Fang for forcing my hand. I tolerated Zane simply because his kingdom and loyalty could benefit Princess Aurelia. I despised the way he looked at her, that soft fondness in his eyes. It was clear Zane was soft. He hadn't experienced the true burden of ruling a kingdom. Zane was new to the game, not born into it as others were. "He's too weak for her," Fang growled. "She craves strength, craves to be challenged." For once, a hidden part of me thought we were perfectly matched, an angel and a demon. Perfect, yet a catastrophic mistake. I slipped into her bedroom silently, the door making no sound as I closed it. I left a slight crack, just enough for a quick escape. I had no intention of staying in her room for long. My gloves left forgotten on the bedside table in my room. abandoned in a cloud of annoyance and jealousy. I had almost turned away when I felt her stir in the bed, sitting up as she sensed a shift in the air. With her wolf deep in slumber, she couldn't see or scent that I was mere feet away from her bed. As I prepared to leave, a familiar, intoxicating scent reached me. Her desire lingered in the air, though it had faded as if from a moment past. Fang, my primal wolf, roared within me, urging me to claim what was rightfully ours under the cover of darkness. "She'll recognize us as her mate," I growled, struggling against his relentless push. "She's not aware," Fang countered, his argument sharp and convincing. "She'll feel the touch of her mate but won't be able to identify us." Despite my inner resistance, the princess's scent was overwhelmingly seductive. The sheer need to touch her, to feel her skin against mine, was almost unbearable. Ignoring my own advice, I knelt beside her bed. I felt her body react to my presence, her caution seeping into me like a palpable force. I heard her sharp intake of breath and wondered if she was bracing herself to scream. I moved swiftly, positioning myself over her as my bare hand pressed against her mouth. The contact sparked a thrilling sensation across my skin, sending electric jolts that made me realize just how starved I had been for this. It was like a deprived addict finally getting his fix. My body responded instinctively, driven by an intense desire that flared to life within me. Memories of the past played vividly in my mind, her soft moans, her body reacting to my touch. Since that moment, I had been yearning to taste her, to feel her come undone on my tongue. Quietly and methodically, I removed the belt from my waist and guided her hands above her head. I wanted her restrained, held back as I savored every inch of her. The need to keep her quiet only heightened my lust. The little princess had effectively enticed me. Her lips parted as if to speak, but I silenced her with a low, firm shh. My voice was a whisper, but it held the weight of my control and desire. I let my fingers trace the hem of her nightshirt, lifting it slowly. Her lips parted again, a soft sound escaping, but I hushed her once more. I could almost feel her mind racing, grasping for any clue about my identity. My fingers trailed up her stomach, tracing languid patterns as I savored the sparks shooting up my skin. The feeling was electric, desire, passion, and raw lust flowing through me like a powerful current. The room was thick with her arousal, and I stifled Fang's impatient growls. I wanted to savor this, to feel the princess squirming beneath me, eager for release. My fingers wandered higher, teasing the underside of her bare breasts. They had taunted me before, pleading for attention. Her soft pants filled the room, her legs parting on their own. I felt my arousal pulse, eager to meet her softness. Her breathless pants were irresistible, and I stifled the growl, threatening to escape me. Tonight wasn't just about taking what I needed, it was about giving her what she needed. I traced my fingers along her bare breasts, gently tugging and pinching her sensitive nipples. Though the beast within me roared for roughness, I kept my touches soft and deliberate. Unable to resist any longer, I took her sweet nipple into my mouth, sucking greedily. Her skin, sweet and creamy with a hint of vanilla, was like a feast for my senses. Her muffled moans were absorbed by the pillow, each whimper testing my resolve. Her growing desire and impatience fueled my own. Smiling to myself, I trailed my way down to her stomach, toying with the hem of her shorts. I quickly removed them, seeing them merely as obstacles. Determined to feel her wetness, I pressed a finger against her slick entrance. My anticipation was almost unbearable. I was finally about to taste the forbidden fruit I had been craving. I yanked her underwear away, my warm breath scattering across her inner thigh. I could feel her body tense, the realization that I was the first to be this close to her most sensitive area, adding to my smug satisfaction. I placed calculated kisses along her thigh, growing more impatient as a frustrated whimper escaped her lips. A sly smirk touched my lips. She had asked for it. I flicked my tongue against her wet lips, suppressing a growl when she flinched. As my control waned and my desire surged, I wrapped my arms around her thighs, pulling her dripping heat closer to my eager mouth. I devoured her with newfound hunger, relishing her sweet taste. Her muffled whines and whimpers drove me harder, wanting her to fight the urge to scream as she came on my tongue. I let my tongue dart down, savoring the sweet wetness I had caused. All I could think of was how delicious my little mate was and how every part of her belonged to me. Every inch of her was mine to touch, savor, and explore. I rubbed my finger against her entrance, letting some of her juices coat it before slipping it inside. I couldn't hold back any longer. I thrust my finger into her with a primal urgency. Her whimpers and moans quickened, and I knew she was relishing every moment. My tongue licked her sweet clit while my finger moved feverishly in and out. I wanted nothing more than to claim her fully, to stay in this moment with only Aurelia, my little princess. I felt her body tense and spasm around my finger. "That's it, baby. Let me taste you." I continued to devour her, lapping up her wetness as her orgasm swept through her. I only stopped when her back arched and her legs began to shake. Though I longed to continue, the princess needed rest. With quiet urgency, I removed the belt from her wrists and slipped out of the room. I opened her window just a crack, hoping it would catch her attention. I was gone before she could piece together her scattered thoughts. Aurelia's POV. I woke up the next morning with a whirlwind of emotions. The excitement about my mate's appearance was overwhelming, but I couldn't shake the confusion over why he hadn't revealed himself. He had to be someone already in the mansion. It seemed impossible that anyone could have bypassed the hundreds of guards my father had stationed around the city center. My choices felt so limited, and I wasn't sure where to start. "Miss me?" Kira's familiar voice echoed in my mind, and I couldn't help but smile with happiness. "I've missed you so much, Kira," I replied, my voice tinged with longing. "It seems things have been eventful in my absence," Kira murmured. I closed my eyes lying in bed and recounted everything that had happened while I was conscious. "Goddess," Kira groaned, "I couldn't have picked a worse time to be gone." "If you recall, it wasn't really your fault," I said, trying to offer comfort with a kind smile. Kira shook her head. "If I had been conscious, we'd know the identity of our mate by now." "We can't dwell on that," I said, frowning. "You're back now, and that's what matters." "Do you feel that?" Kira's voice was distant, lost in thought. I furrowed my brows in confusion, getting out of bed. "Feel what?" "Shh, don't talk. Just open yourself up and think about our mate," Kira instructed. I did as she asked. At first, I felt nothing. I stared at the swirling colors behind my closed eyelids in confusion until something broke through. It was like gentle prickles running along my skin. It took a moment for me to realize what those sensations were. Emotions that weren't mine or Kira's, started flooding my mind. Disbelief, frustration, and longing overwhelmed me. It was hard to explain, but I knew they weren't coming from either of us. "Mate," Kira murmured softly. "It's our mate." "How is that possible?" I asked, my frown deepening. "The mate bond," Kira replied. "What he did last night activated it. It brought it to life." "So, I can feel what he feels?" I asked in disbelief. "It seems so," Kira said, immersed in our mate's emotions. "Once the bond strengthens, you might even be able to communicate with him." "I wish I could do that now," I sighed. I quickly dressed, eager to leave my room for a while. I refused to be confined to a single room, even though I was stuck in the house. I chose a light-colored sundress that fell to mid-thigh and hugged my curves perfectly. Magnus knocked on the adjoining door and entered silently at my call. His dark, intense eyes met mine, and I found it difficult to maintain his gaze. I had found my mate, yet Magnus still captivated me. This wasn't something my father had ever mentioned. He never talked about having feelings outside of the mate bond. Was there something wrong with me? Magnus's mask was back in place, and I wondered what it was for. I had already seen his face. What was there to hide? "Dad, are you in your office?" I asked through the mind link, waiting for his response. "I am," Dad's voice came through, sounding stressed and tired. "I wouldn't turn down a visit, Aura. Today has been quite rough." "Good, I'll be on my way shortly," I replied with a grin. "And the day hasn't even begun yet, Dad." "Do not remind me," Dad groaned before ending the mind link. Just as I was about to leave the bedroom, a knock sounded on the door. Ember entered with a smile, though her gaze flickered warily to Magnus before settling on me. "A gift from my mom," Ember said, handing me a steaming muffin. My mouth practically watered as I took the muffin. "Your mom is amazing." "She figured you'd need one after last night." Ember's tone was even, but her raised eyebrow hinted at something more. I nearly choked on the muffin, holding back a cough. What does she mean? Ember shrugged. Don't know. She just said you'd be having a long night. Her honey-colored eyes seemed to pierce through me, and I felt like she was reading my thoughts. I assume the night was good, at least? Ember asked. I nodded tightly. Yes, actually it was. Have you seen Vesper? Ember asked, her frown showing something was bothering her. I have, I said, noticing her unease. Is something wrong? I thought I was supposed to be the know-it-all, Ember retorted. I shrugged. I'm allowed to have breakthroughs sometimes. Vesper's been acting funny, Ember said, shaking her head. Funny? I asked, frowning. My birthday was pretty traumatic for everyone. No, it's not that. Trust me, I'm traumatized too, but this is something else, Ember said, her concern evident. Maybe something's going on in her personal life, I suggested. Vesper had a tendency to be dramatic. It could be nothing serious. You could be right, Ember said, seeming reassured for the moment. Heading to see your dad? How'd you know? I smirked. Another feeling? No, Ember shook her head. Just figured he had some stuff to tell you. Stuff? What stuff? I asked, puzzled. Nuh-uh, Ember said, her curls bouncing as she shook her head. Not for me to tell. Come on, I groaned. You brought it up. Just give me a hint. Ember sighed, pursing her lips. Fine. But don't tell your dad I said anything. I promise, I said earnestly. What goes on between my assistant and me stays between us. A flicker of pride crossed her honey gaze as she nodded. Fine. Don't be surprised if you see those red-haired royals around, or any of the others for that matter. My teeth clicked together, and I stared at Ember for a moment. Why would any of the royals still be here? Nope. Ember shook her head firmly. I'm not telling you anything more. Go talk to your dad. He'll explain the rest. Ember, I don't know what I'd do without you, I said with a grateful grin. Flattery isn't going to get you more information, Ember replied, hands on her hips, though her tone was playful. But I appreciate it. Ember followed me from my bedroom, and we parted ways at the end of the hall. Magnus trailed silently behind me, but his presence was almost overwhelming. As much as I wanted to dwell on why I still had feelings for Magnus, I had more pressing concerns. Keeping all the royals in the mansion seemed counterproductive. If any were responsible for the attack at my gala, their presence here would only increase their opportunities. Halfway to my dad's office, I ran into a familiar face. Evander Winslow strolled down the hall with an air of arrogant confidence. Well, what a surprise, Princess, Evander said with a flash of his perfect porcelain smile. Hello, Evander, I replied, forcing a polite smile. It was exhausting enough to maintain a facade at my birthday gala. Now I had to keep up the pretense in my own home. I wasn't expecting to see you here, Evander said, running a hand through his sandy blonde hair. He was dressed quite differently from the gala. His sky-blue button-down shirt matched his eyes, and every article of clothing seemed meticulously chosen to highlight his flamboyant style. I do live here, after all, I said, managing a flirty giggle. I haven't been back for more than an hour, and already I'm longing for my bed, Kira grumbled. You and me both, I agreed, exasperated. Kira clearly had no love for Evander Winslow, and I couldn't blame her. Evander was carefully composed and skilled at maintaining his chosen persona, but he was deeply enmeshed in the games royals loved to play. I wondered which side he was on. Have you given more thought to my offer, dear princess? Evander asked, a smirk tugging at his lips as he gave me what he probably thought was a dazzling smile. I fought the urge to cringe as he tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The gesture might have been charming if I wasn't already wary of his true nature. I'm afraid I haven't, I said, pouting slightly. I've been unconscious for a few days. So I've heard, Evander murmured to himself. Why might that be? I can't see fear making you unconscious for days. A knot tightened in my stomach, and the strange jewelry around my neck began to tingle. I didn't often get gut feelings, but right now it was telling me to lie, to come up with a reasonable excuse for my prolonged unconsciousness. I was almost murdered, I said softly, letting fear seep into my voice. My wolf used all her strength to protect me. I see, Evander said, appearing placated for the moment. And if you don't mind my asking, how are you still alive, love? I wouldn't expect someone as delicate as yourself to survive such a horrendous attack. It's truly a blessing you emerged unscathed. Kira was practically seething at his condescending tone, and I was listening carefully. Despite his assholery, Evander seemed genuine in his words. Either he was an excellent liar, or he had nothing to do with the gala attack. Delicate, Kira snarled. I'll show him delicate when I really don't want to hear the end of that sentence, Kira, I interrupted, disturbed by the images forming in my mind. I wouldn't be standing here today if it weren't for Dylan Lancaster, I said appreciatively. This wasn't the response Evander wanted. His face twisted into a scowl, and his features darkened. Lancaster, he spat. You know, I was almost set up with his sister. I didn't know that, I said, feigning interest while actually wondering what vendetta he had against the Lancaster family. Dylan wasn't bad, but his sister and mother were definitely ones to watch out for. Lucky my father was smarter than the lot, Evander said proudly. He declined the offer. Your father seems like a very wise man, I lied. In my opinion, any man who refuses his own mate is a fool. He is, Evander nodded with pride. He's responsible for getting our kingdom where it is today. So, does this mean you're considering Dylan Lancaster as your intended? Evander's eyes flashed with something like hatred as he mentioned Dylan's name. Oh, heavens no, I said, shaking my head with a look of horror. The thought hasn't crossed my mind. Good, good, Evander said, his hand trailing along my jawline. Do keep me in mind when you're considering your options. As I said, we could achieve great things together. With those final words, Evander left me alone with my thoughts. Despite his attempt to make his touch seem romantic, it felt far from it. I felt like an exhibit, with my beauty being dissected under his critical gaze. I was so deep in my own mind that I barely registered the emotions swirling inside me. It seemed I could only sense my mate's feelings when my mind was clear. I knocked on my dad's office door and entered when I heard his voice. Magnus gave me a soft nod, waiting outside. Dad looked up from his pile of papers and sighed. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. So, I ran into someone interesting today. I raised an eyebrow, watching awareness flash in his eyes. He knew exactly who I meant. And who might that be, Aura? He replied, playing along instead of admitting it outright. Evander Winslow, I pursed my lips. If I look around, will I find the other royals too? Dad sighed and raked a hand through his curly hair. I'm afraid you might. And why is that? I dropped into one of the leather chairs across from his desk. I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier, Aura. His brow furrowed. You were unconscious for days. When I wasn't worrying about you, I was busy with new security protocols and hiring extra personnel. I understand, Dad. My expression softened. Tell me now. I asked the royals to stay for a few days, he said with a scowl, clearly not happy about it. While the Beaumont family has returned to their kingdom, the others are still here, under questioning about the attack at your gala. You think some of them were involved? I grimaced. If I had to bet, I'd say Beaumont without hesitation. Dad's face tightened, his eyes guarded. I agree with you, Aura, but we have to be patient. When royals are involved, things are rarely as simple as they seem. Isn't it dangerous, though? I frowned. If some of them are guilty, they're right here in the mansion. Dad nodded. Yes, I've considered that, but I trust Magnus to protect you for now. I plan to question them as quickly as possible and send the innocent ones on their way. They won't be here long, right? I asked, hoping for reassurance. While I didn't mind Zane or even Dylan staying, I wanted the others gone. The memory of my birthday gala flashed in my mind. Dylan Lancaster tackling one of the masked men to save me. I promise you, they won't. Dad nodded, a small smile touching his lips. One more thing, I called out as I turned to leave his office. Dylan Lancaster saved my life that night. Dad looked up, surprise lighting his eyes. Did he? I nodded. He tackled one of the attackers before they could kill me. If not for him, I wouldn't be here. I'll remember that, Aura. Dad smiled softly. Thank you. Aura, may I have a moment of your time? My uncle's voice filtered into my mind. Of course, I responded. I can head to your office now if you're free. In about 20 minutes, Orion replied. I'm finishing up some work for your father. I'll see you then, I said, closing the mind link. I wandered the halls in silence for a while, not eager to encounter any more royals, but as luck would have it, I ran into a familiar face. Hello, Princess Aurelia. My name dripped from Daisy Lancaster's lips with a barely concealed sneer. She stood a few feet away, as beautiful as ever, her fiery red hair tumbling over her shoulders as she eyed me critically. "Hello, Princess Daisy." I greeted her with a polite smile. "You've been scarce these past few days," she remarked, her eyes scrutinizing my every move. "Oh yes," I nodded, keeping my emotions in check. "My birthday gala was eventful. I needed a few days to recover." "How nice it must be to simply step away for a bit." Daisy's lips curled into a sneer, her tone dripping with condescension. Kira's patience was wearing thin, and so was mine. Daisy might not resemble her mother in looks, but her demeanor was a mirror image, always laced with hidden barbs. She insulted you with a smile, poised and polite on the surface, but cutting underneath. There was no use pretending to be a ditzy princess with women like her. They were too smart and far too observant. "Sometimes it's necessary when someone tries to kill you," I murmured, keeping my gaze locked on hers. "Though it wasn't exactly a well-executed attempt, was it?" A flicker of something passed through Daisy's eyes. "You're finally ready to join the game," she smirked, her lips twitching with amusement. "I heard my mother spoke with you." "She did," I nodded, "though I'm not sure what we have in common." Irritation flared in Daisy's eyes, along with envy. Without my title, they wouldn't give me a second glance. "We're women," she said quietly. "We're treated as decorations, but we're much more than that, far smarter than they think." "You're right," I agreed, "but it seems our goals differ." "You think so now, but you'll see." Her ruby lips pressed into a thin line. "Mother believes you can be swayed to our side. Think about it. We could achieve great things together." With one last serpent-like smile, Daisy strode past me and down the hall. "Evander Winslow said the same thing," Kira murmured. "We could do great things together." "Why are they so desperate for my loyalty?" I asked. "It can't just be about land or subjects." "Isn't it obvious?" Kira scowled. "Daisy and her mother are two of the sharpest royals here, aside from the Beaumont family. I'm betting they have plans, and those plans depend on getting you on their side." "They can try all they want, but I don't like either of them," I said, frowning. "They're not going to stop trying," Kira murmured, "but I worry about what they'll do if you refuse." I sighed. "I guess we'll have to wait and see." Making my way to Uncle Orion's office, I entered at the sound of his voice. Magnus gave me a familiar nod and remained outside as usual. Inside, Uncle Orion was hunched over his desk, looking as worn down as Dad had been. Papers scattered everywhere, and he looked like he hadn't moved in hours. "Enjoying yourself?" I teased with a smirk, but he only glanced up warily. "Oh, tons of fun," he replied sarcastically, smirking back. "I think I'd be the happiest man alive if I never had to look at another piece of paper again." "Well, I hate to break it to you, but that day isn't coming anytime soon," I chuckled, sitting down across from him. Orion shook his head dramatically. "I'm convinced I'll take my last breath right here at this cursed desk." "Let's hope not for a long while," I said softly, offering him a smile. Seeing him and Dad so buried in work because of what happened weighed on me, even if I knew it wasn't my fault. The guilt lingered all the same. Uncle Orion gave me a faint smile, then glanced back at his papers as if something weighed heavily on his mind. "Uncle?" I asked, frowning. "What did you want to talk to me about?" His sigh was heavy, and his face fell. My stomach twisted at the sight, but I kept my composure. "This conversation has to stay between us, Aura," he said seriously, pushing the papers aside. "Are you all right with that?" I nodded. Of course, Orion often shared things with me that Dad preferred to keep quiet, so I wasn't surprised. "I know what your necklace can do, Aura," he finally said, his lips pressing together tightly as though the words were difficult. I blinked, taken aback. "You do?" Dad had been clear about keeping the necklace's powers a secret, and I hadn't expected Uncle Orion to know. "I recognized it at your gala," Orion explained, his brow furrowed in thought. "It took me a while to remember where I'd seen it before, but your mother once wore that very necklace, didn't she?" "She did," I replied softly, my fingers absent-mindedly brushing the cool metal resting against my skin. "I also know it holds certain abilities for the she-wolves who wear it," he continued, his expression growing more troubled. "Has it shown itself to you yet?" I shook my head. "No, not really." Flashes of the birthday gala surfaced in my mind. Those 10 men collapsing, lifeless, after that surge of energy shot through me. but I wasn't sure if that was the necklace or just my imagination. Your father may not have told you this, but the necklace is dangerous, Orion said quietly, his eyes filled with concern, especially to its wearer. Surprise hit me hard. Dad hadn't mentioned anything like that. He'd only said it was a weapon, not that it could harm me too. He didn't say that, I admitted, frowning as disappointment settled in. Orion's gaze softened. The necklace is a conduit. It doesn't care whether it's used for good or evil. If your intentions aren't pure, there could be catastrophic consequences. I grimaced. Like what? Orion sighed deeply. It could destroy your body, your mind, even your soul. If someone good uses it for the wrong reasons, that evil energy would corrupt them from the inside. My head spun as I processed his words. Just when I thought I was starting to understand, another complication appeared. Orion must have noticed the worry on my face. I'm sure your father had his reasons for not telling you, he said, offering a small, reassuring smile. He only wants to protect you. But why would he give me something that could hurt me? I asked, frustrated. That doesn't make any sense. Orion thought for a moment. Maybe he believed the benefits outweighed the risks. But there's something I need to ask of you. I nodded. What is it? Aura, I'm only thinking of your safety, Orion said seriously. I think it would be best if you gave me the necklace, at least for now. I'll hold on to it until you're ready, truly ready. Kira remained quiet in my mind, and I knew she was just as uncertain as I was. Uncle Orion was genuinely worried about us, and if what he said was true, the necklace could be dangerous. But how could I give it up without knowing for sure? I don't know, Uncle, I said hesitantly. I need time to think about it. Orion nodded, his expression gentle. I understand, Aura. Take your time. A question had been nagging at me since the start of our conversation, and I finally voiced it. What brought all of this on? His face darkened. Something strange happened the night of your gala. 10 of the masked men collapsed, just like that. I nodded slowly. I saw it happen. I had an autopsy performed on one of them, Orion revealed, surprising me. My eyes widened. What did they find? What killed them? His next words sent a chill down my spine. I believe it was you, Aura. You and the necklace, Orion said, his voice low. They were dead before they hit the ground. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't have. Orion's gaze was steady. I don't see how it could have been anything else. Aura, those men were lichens, every last one of them. But when their bodies hit the floor, they were human. They weren't lichens anymore. My mind was spinning as I left Uncle Orion's office. 10 men were dead, and it was my fault. While the weight of it all settled heavily on my shoulders, regret was strangely absent. Those men had crashed my birthday gala, putting everyone there, innocent or not, at risk. In my eyes, they got what they deserved. Kira remained quiet for the next half hour, processing what we had just learned. That's why I felt so drained, isn't it? Kira eventually spoke up, her brow furrowed. I felt completely exhausted after everything happened. I did too, I admitted. But what if our energy was drained because of our intentions? What were you thinking about when it happened? She asked thoughtfully. Just protecting Magnus, I replied, recalling that moment with unsettling clarity. He was on the verge of death, and I couldn't let that happen. Then I don't see how your intentions weren't pure, Kira shrugged. You weren't trying to kill them. I roamed the grounds, searching for Ember, hoping she could shed some light on what Uncle Orion and I had discussed. He wanted the necklace to protect me, and I trusted him with my life, so why not with this too? But Ember was nowhere to be found. I decided to check the kitchen for Amara instead. Amara mentioned Ember had picked up an extra shift at the cafe, but something in her tone made me hesitate. She couldn't even meet my eyes as she spoke. If my mind weren't already swirling with too many thoughts, I would have pressed her further. Feeling defeated, I gave up on finding Ember and went looking for Dylan, but came up empty-handed again. With no particular direction in mind, I ended up wandering through the gardens. My mother had always loved the tranquility of this place, the soothing aroma of flowers, but today, even the colorful blossoms offered no peace. My thoughts were too chaotic to settle. I was sitting alone in the gazebo when Vesper found me, a servant following closely behind with a cart of food. There you are, Vesper huffed, dropping onto the bench beside me. I've been looking everywhere for you. Guilt pricked at me. I hadn't seen Vesper since the gala, and while she had been searching for me, I hadn't spared a thought for her. Even with all the chaos going on, I should have made time for my friend. Sorry, I muttered, frowning. There's just been so much on my mind. I glanced at the food but found I had no appetite. Stress had taken up all the space in my stomach. I get it, Vesper sighed, picking at the food on the cart. But are you feeling better? You had everyone worried for a while. I nodded. As good as I can, considering everything that happened. Your dad will figure out what's going on, she said confidently. I'm sure of it. I'm sorry, I said, realizing how self-absorbed I'd been. I didn't even ask how you're holding up. I couldn't find you that night. I'm managing, Vesper said with a frown. I slipped out right after your dad did. His guards were all over him, ushering him out before he could even look back for you. Dad got out? I frowned, recalling how Uncle Orion had dragged Dylan and me deeper into the ballroom when I demanded to see him. Yeah, but he didn't go willingly, Vesper replied, shaking her head. He was nearly losing it, shouting your name. I thought he was going to tear his own guards apart. I had no idea, I murmured. But none of that matters now, Vesper said, giving me a small smile. You're alive, your dad's alive, and that's what's important. She was right, of course, but my mind couldn't help drifting back to the people who lost their lives that night. Sure, my family and friends were safe, but those other lives still mattered. The rest of the day dragged by, a blur of uneventful moments. Dad and Uncle Orion were swamped with work, so I didn't get a chance to talk to them again. Of all the royals still in the house, I seemed to run into only the ones I liked the least. Late that night, close to midnight, hunger finally drove me from my room. Naturally, Magnus followed. He had a way of always knowing when I was up. As I padded through the hallways, I nearly collided with a flustered Dylan. His eyes were wide with what looked like fear and suspicion. Aurelia, just the person I needed to see, Dylan said, his voice strained. I've been looking for you all day, I replied, a bit frustrated. That doesn't matter, Dylan dismissed with a shake of his head. We need to talk. Now. I noticed his gaze flicker warily toward Magnus. You can trust him, I reassured Dylan. Anything you say stays between us. Dylan hesitated, his troubled eyes lingering on Magnus for a moment longer before focusing back on me. You can never be too careful, Aurelia, he whispered, his voice laced with suspicion and torment, so much so that I almost flinched. He's scared, Kira murmured. Can you blame him? I frowned. After meeting his mother and sister, I understand why. And he doesn't even have his father on his side, Kira added with a shake of her head. His dad's just another pawn. Before I could respond, Dylan leaned in close, his proximity making me acutely aware of his scent, fresh leaves mixed with a hint of spice. I felt Magnus stiffen beside me, his readiness evident in case Dylan tried anything harmful. Dylan's voice was urgent and low. If something happens to me, you need to know. His gaze was intense, locking onto mine. Just then, a voice I had come to dread interrupted us. Dylan, there you are. Lily Lancaster appeared in the hall, her eyes betraying a knowing gleam that suggested she had interrupted something significant. Dylan pulled away abruptly, his expression still charged with the weight of his message. Come now, Dylan, Lily said with a sniff. Your father is asking for you, and you mustn't keep him waiting. Yes, Mother. Dylan's voice was devoid of emotion, his eyes lingering on me one last time before he turned and walked down the hall, casting a final wide-eyed glance back when he was out of Lily's sight. Princess Aurelia, Lily said, her tone seemingly polite. Having trouble sleeping? On the contrary, I replied, forcing a smile. I enjoy the night. It gives me plenty of time to think. Lily's face brightened with practiced skill, her emotions well controlled. Ah, so you've considered my offer? She grinned, her smile making her look years younger. Her pale hair was tightly braided and hung to her waist, and her casual yet regal attire only added to her composed demeanor. I have thought it over, I said, nodding. You intend for Daisy to rule? Lily's smile faltered, her eyes betraying a hint of something hidden. My son is the rightful heir to the throne, Princess, she said, maintaining an air of innocence. That is well known. He is, I agreed, but as you said, women can do things men cannot. A fleeting emotion passed through Lily's eyes, and I knew I had struck a nerve. Very astute for your age, Princess, she said with a smirk. You are correct. Men are often distracted by appearances and believe that brute force is the ultimate source of power. Would you like some advice, princess? Yes, Lily, I said, letting genuine curiosity show in my eyes. The true source of power doesn't lie in brute strength, Lily said, her voice dripping with hidden knowledge. It belongs to those who work quietly behind the scenes, waiting for the right moment to strike. I recognized that Lily's insights could be valuable, but I also understood that we were on opposite sides of the same coin. Power is rarely given to those who actively seek it. Good night, princess, Lily said, turning to leave. It seems you have much to contemplate tonight. Good night, Lily, I replied, watching her walk away before retreating to my room, the gnawing hunger in my stomach barely noticeable compared to the turmoil of my thoughts. Though Lily's words were cryptic, I had gained one clear insight tonight. Dylan had every reason to be fearful. Once Magnus and I were safely inside my room, I spoke quietly, mindful of eavesdroppers. I had been trying to distance myself from Magnus since my mate's visit, feeling it was wrong to connect with my bodyguard when my mate was out there waiting for me. What do you make of Lily, Magnus? I asked, studying his dark eyes for any hint of emotion. His response seemed unexpected, as though he hadn't anticipated my question. But I knew that the quiet ones often see the most. She's a snake, Magnus said swiftly, his voice thick with a strange accent. I think Dylan is in danger, I said, nodding. Dylan and many others, Magnus agreed, his gaze intense and warm, easing the turmoil in my mind. I don't know what to do, I sighed, sitting on the edge of my bed. Lily isn't the only snake here. I'm not sure where to begin. Magnus paused, his eyes observing me with care. You can't eliminate every snake at once, he said. You deal with them one by one. One by one, I repeated to myself, the beginnings of a plan forming in my mind. I looked up at Magnus with renewed determination. This plan wouldn't solve everything, but it might offer some much-needed insight. I need a favor,